It's 2 o'clock, so I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District to order. And we'll begin with the roll call.
All right, Epstein,
Present.
Schroeder, here, Miniteranda,
Here.
Tucker, absent, Dornbrook here.
Okay. And Eric, announcements.
Just like to welcome everyone to the regularly scheduled meeting and almost Independence Day meeting, and hopefully we'll all see you at the summer festival tomorrow.
Okay, does anyone have any corrections to the agenda or to the consent calendar?
Nope.
Okay, the only comment I want to make about the agenda, we've put it in the order of things that have, everything in the agenda really needs to be addressed today, but we've listed in the things that really need it, things that we really need it. So I will try to manage the time as best we can, although making sure we cover everything, but in my mind, I would like to be at item I at 3:15, but I realize that's a desire, and I won't get there by cutting short conversation.
328 pages.
Yes. Okay. So with that, are there comments from the audience, an opportunity to address the board on matters that aren't on the agenda? If you don't have one, just look away from me and not to look at me. Okay, I don't see any. And I didn't see any written comments from the public in the board packet. So we're now ready for the adoption of the consent calendar. Is there a motion?
Yeah, motion to adopt.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, second by Doug. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Oh yeah, we can now.
Yeah, we
This is
can.
here.
Oh.
Goodness.
Okay. We'll now move on to item 9A, finances, beginning on page 21 of the packet.
All right, these have been reviewed by finance. We're back on the regular schedule. So the overview of budget variances were listed. I'm happy to address any questions on that.
Any questions on the overview, Eric?
Nope.
Yes,
Go ahead.
sorry to be late. Did we start at 2?
We started to.
And we got to item number 9 by 2:02. That's tremendous. Let's see. I simply don't understand the first bullets, the first several items of the variance sheet. What is, for example, what are we saying about snow removal contract services or 54,000 of fire assessment? Why are they in variance?
Oh, so it's the overview and budget variances. So that's the overview part. The board had previously asked monthly, what is other operating income? So we started listing out every item that's in that. So it's not a variance, it's just a recitation of what is in that line, other operating income.
I see. Then, well, then I guess the question is why is there a variance for?
They're not
They're not-
variances, they're
over.
If you go to page 25, you see other non-operating revenues,
Yeah,
and it's a big number, right? And so we say what comprises that number.
just shy of $1 million.
So this is
And
outlining the detail of what is
Okay.
in that category.
Okay.
So this sheet's available for general comments or for specific variances, just to reduce the time required to review the
Instead of going
finances.
through page by page, we went to this about a year ago.
Yeah.
No, I'm familiar with it. I didn't realize that it was not to explain variances, but simply to itemize what is behind
Well, it's both.
a catch-all like other, okay. Well,
Really, what it was is we'd run into the same questions every single board meeting because people forget, they'd say, oh, what's a big number? What's an other? And then we'd have to respond to it. So instead we enumerate the detail on it. And there are many items in there are variances, but that is more of a,
Then
Just
why
clarification.
would $700,000 for snow removal contract services be under other as opposed to the snow removal
Because it's
fund?
not a government fund or an enterprise fund. So
Although
it goes
there's-
into other income because it's.
But there is a snow removal fund in the operating reports, or is there not? There is, right?
There is, but the way we have to report income from our auditors is it has to go into here.
Thank you. Okay. Then one other item that wasn't clear, CARB auction sales, maybe. Am I the only one who doesn't know what CARB stands for?
California Air Resources Board.
Okay, I have no intelligent questions to ask about all that at this point.
Okay, are there any comments from finance on the package overall?
Nothing further, no.
Okay, are there any other questions?
On expenses total or just on the variance page?
Just the variance page to
Just the
start.
variance
How about
page.
other?
Okay, all right, why don't we
We
continue?
can move on if you have
Yeah.
specific questions.
Okay, specific questions on the finance? On the April financials or May preliminaries?
All right, I'm the only one with questions. Ops and maintenance and contract services are each 100K, 108,000 over.
What page are you on?
Electric. Ops and maintenance and contract service, or maybe it's total. I'm sorry, it's combined total. Consolidated.
In the consolidated budget or the electric? I'm sorry.
I said consolidated.
Oh, okay. After you said. What page is that then? Should be at
Look
the
up on the
top.
right corner there.
I assume it's page 25.
Yeah.
I just read my, yeah. I'm
22 or?
Oh,
it's already
25.
I'm scrolling. Consolidated seems to be 25, yes.
Sure.
Contract services, operating expenses, those are two items about, $600,000 combined. I'm sorry, no, 1.2 combined, and each of them are 108,000 over budget, 10 months into the fiscal year.
Yeah, so those are explained in each fund. So if you go back to the variances, you'll see, one of them is, we'd had a consultant for the cross connection control plan.
That was,
That was unexpected. So that was 50,000 there.
that's propane, right?
No, that's
That's
water.
Water,
That's
sorry.
water. And then electric was higher due to transformer testing. Timing. So yeah, so some of these are just timing issues. So I mean, each fund explains why there's variances on each of them. So
Okay,
if you wanted more detail, it would all be listed up in there.
all right. Question on electric cogs.
Huh?
Just, this seems like small compared to the overall, size of our electric revenue, but overall, it appears that our revenue is up. Both residential and commercial combined in electrical is about 100K over, and yet COGS is under. Does that, there was mention of the Shell contract, but I'm guessing maybe this is because of our actual wholesale price for electrical energy. Why would COGS be under budget when our revenue is slightly over budget?
So our COGS were over budget, COGS by 200,000, as we explained last month. That was due to that 6-month hit we had from the winter, and then we went to the hedge, and that's what has leveled it out. But it would have continued climbing had we not done the hedge.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, should we move on to May preliminary?
Any other questions anywhere else?
Not hearing any.
Yeah, so May preliminaries, a little bit better than budget year to date, which is good on commercial and under on residential. And we talked about that last month too. There's no correlation between the two ostensibly. So, and then our internal usage was less than we anticipated, which was good as well. So overall, we're 191,000 to the better in terms of income per May. For the year to date in May.
Yep. All right, cash flow?
nothing really extraordinary here. We do have we just had a USDA payment come through. So you'll be seeing that in the next iteration, but it was planned for and expected. So we're still looking good. December's still our worst month as per usual. Actually, it looked like January this year, but
Okay. I don't see any other questions on finances, so we'll move on to the operating budget.
sure. So this really hasn't changed substantively since we last met. So instead of going through page by page, I'll just tell you where anything has changed. We do have updated year-end projected actuals for them, so that has changed across the board. And the property tax distribution changed because we knew we came in at 145. And so we're hoping to keep it at the 200,000 level for the next few years. So that was a change, which freed up some property taxes, which were then assigned elsewhere. So the
The
property
145 was on electric.
correct.
Electric
The
came in better
commitment.
than budget.
Correct.
Needs per property.
So that leaves more property taxes for the other funds that are available to use it, which are the enterprise and governmental funds. Ostensibly what I did in the estimate, I restored funding to water and wastewater based on the rate study. So that was an increase from this first version. And then I took the balance and applied it all to fire because that seems to be the place we need it most. So that's how I budgeted for. So if you look at fire, you can see their property tax allocation this year is substantively higher than in previous years. It was just enough to make it even. So looking around 300,000 each year is what we're looking at for funding. It's the last line on that page on the fire department fund page. So that's a big change from when we first started. Other than that, nothing has substantively changed in any of this since the last time you saw it.
Okay, are there any, this being the start of the new fiscal year, we would look to approve the budget for this year at this meeting unless there's, and see if there's any remaining questions.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Bob, is we do have, so we approve the budget, but with the caveat that the snow removal fund is going to be one of two ways. So,
Right.
And that to be determined.
Right.
That would be the only oddball. And we have, and both of them are presented in here, both options. So it's either 730 or 840 is what we're estimating. It'll be based on month-end close of June, which will happen at the end of this month. And as we've said at quite a few meetings, August will be when we are able to have the final numbers and get those contracts out.
Right. Is now the time to ask if there's an update in KMA discussions? Like, do we know which way in the fork of the road we will go?
I don't think they can choose until we give you a dollar
Right.
price. And so that's August.
We're waiting and anxious to learn what we can along the way.
Thank you.
I mean, if you wanted
Don't wanna
to,
be
these numbers are as close as I can get through April. So I have actual costs through April. So I have May and June in there, which should be de minimis since I told all my staff to quit working in snow removal in May and June. So I wouldn't have any surprise charges. I do have one outstanding $93,000 invoice, which I have accounted for in this budget. The check hasn't cashed. So if you wanted to take your percentages from last month and apply it to these, you would be close. I can't say it's going to be the amount, but you would be close. So you do have a ballpark figure, and so if I remember correctly, it's about 300. I think is roughly your number. I think yours are East Meadows, and the other one was like 280. But yeah,
31.2%.
there you go. Yeah, of 840. So there you go.
Of 840, right?
So 264 then, roughly. 30% would be 264. So plus or minus. How close am I, Bob? You see typing it in.
262,000. Is that
About
right?
2,000.
Did I miss? Oh, I'm going to try that one more time.
Okay, so that would be the only caveat I ask for the board. And then what I will say as well, the whole G&A allocation changes depending on which scenario we go through. The budget that's being presented here is the current G&A allocation, as we talked about. So that's what's in all the budget except for this last slide that's up there. If KMA comes back to the district, all the G&A allocations will change and the whole budget will change. So just be aware. So that may be a budget variance carrying throughout the year.
Did we update the G&A allocation for cable? We talked about that in the last meeting.
I'm waiting for Olga to tell me if I can consolidate that just into general.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's something we should rebalance next year, but as Stanish says, it's income and we have to incur the costs anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So.
Okay, are there other, and the draft operating budget includes the capital plan for that year, for this coming year?
It does, and we'll talk about the
Okay.
capital, yes, but next, but yes, it is included in here at the bottom portion of the
Okay.
budget.
So I'm gonna ask if there's a motion to approve operating budget.
Yeah, motion to approve the operating budget.
Okay,
I'll second that.
second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, then all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? No one? Okay, we have a budget. And we'll hopefully have a new snow removal estimate. See what happens.
New, old,
New, whatever it is,
Reunited.
whatever it is, we hope it happens.
Everything old is new again, right?
Okay, let's move
Reunited and
on
it feels so good.
to capital improvement budget.
And I'm just gonna highlight anything that changed.
Right.
Again, nothing substantively changed on this. The one thing that did change because we actually have the real number. Oh, I will take, I'm gonna stop on wastewater. I did receive the June bill quite early from KG Walters, their invoice or their progress payment. So the numbers for how much we're going to spend in wastewater has been adjusted to reflect that. I actually had real hard numbers and it's been reflected in the operating budget, but it's also been reflected in the capital budget. So if they look different and why did things shift so much, it's because I actually knew what we paid them, what we're going to pay them. So that was the big shift in wastewater, but it's based on real data, which is nice.
Mhm.
And then same for fire. We actually have a recommended, if we do go with that consultant, we know what their price is. So I actually have a real number in there for the 218 now, which is different than was before. And for employee housing, we actually got a quote for replacing carpet, and it was more than we had originally anticipated. And so that number is now in there at somewhere at 10,000 is what it costs to replace it. And we had it at 8,500 before. So that has been fixed as well. Other than that,
And
no substantive change.
the other change I just want to mention is the roof for the propane.
Correct. Yes. So. Yeah. So it pushed out a year. We're doing design. We're in the design. Well, we're in the master planning portion now, and then the design phase will follow that, which will all be the same fiscal year. Then the construction would follow. And we did have the consultant out here, Rick, 3 weeks ago. So they're working on it, the master plan as we speak, and they have the dimensions of what we would like. And we're going to go 2 roof alternatives, the bare minimum and the optimum, and then we'll decide in terms of pricing which one we're going to go with.
We were not originally hoping to cover those tanks for this winter upcoming, or were we?
We were doing the design for that this year. It would not be covered this
We
winter.
weren't even hoping to have them covered for this coming winter. We were hoping them for the following winter.
Correct.
And now it's going to be an additional winter before they're covered?
No.
Oh, good.
Well, depends on how long construction takes, because our fiscal year starts in July, so that's when construction occurs. So next year, you say yet another year, you're right fiscal year wise, but you're
No,
not
no,
right.
just winter. So,
Next summer, basically.
right. So it's not as if we're losing a winter of coverage. I mean, isn't the real issue that we need to protect these access and egress and all that from snow? And so this delay does not mean that we're an extra winter at risk. It
No,
sounds
we were
like-
always not going to have it done by this winter.
Thank you. Got it.
Okay, anything else changes on capital improvements or questions about the capital budget?
No.
Okay, can I hear a motion to approve that capital budget?
Moved.
Yeah.
I'll second.
I move seconded. Okay, any further discussion? Not, all in favor, say aye. Okay, Okay, no, anyone? No, okay, passes. All right, so we're now on to the schedule of fees.
So we update our
Item
fees
B.
annually, based on well, some of it's based on actual cost, some is based on CPI. Our connection fees are updated based on CPI. The CPI that we use, is the June, Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI, which comes out in the middle of this month. So once that number is out, we will apply to the connection fees. But we got updated quotes from our suppliers for all of the equipment we install, and these numbers reflect the district's actual costs. That's on the connection fees and services. And then the only thing that changed on this miscellaneous fees, was the grease trap inspections. They are taking quite a bit of time and quite a bit of multiple site visits to ensure that they are done. And so we need to recoup the labor costs for these particular inspections.
And all this was reviewed in finance, and we recommend approving these changes.
Okay, and the open change is waiting for the CPI
That
for
is
the per EDU charges.
correct.
Okay,
One thing I'll recommend as we go into the next rate study, which will be coming up, and as we go into the one subsequent to that, that we adjust and start using the April CPI, which comes out by the time we're doing budget. I can actually give you real budget numbers on the CPI, and that would be helpful. But that's something in the future, but that'll maybe could start next year with the
Right.
water wastewater rate study.
okay, are there any questions on the schedule of fees? No, okay, is there a motion to approve?
Yeah, motion to approve the connection fees.
Okay, second,
Second.
all right. All in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No, okay. Good, then we're on the third-party accounting assistance, item 9E.
So a while ago, the finance committee formed an audit subcommittee and met with Olga just to discuss their concerns with the last audit. She recommended a third-party assistance. She was able to provide one name local to Northern California. I met with them, and they were quite qualified. Work a lot in school districts, but they also do a lot of special districts. And was very impressed with them and brought this to finance. And in the interest of timing, they recommended that we just contract with them directly for the services that are listed here. We have the rate schedule attached, as well as their resume and rough proposal as well. So I think the finance committee and staff both recommend approving this.
And do you want to comment on?
Yeah,
on the
but
background?
the audit wasn't as clean as we wanted it to be last year. All the issues got resolved, and we did have an audit that we think accurately represented our financial position. So, but we wanted to make it cleaner this year. So, Standish O'Grady, Jack Longanetti, and myself, we were an audit subcommittee. We met with the auditor, Olga. She made this recommendation, and then the rest was described by Eric and brought back to the finance committee. We felt like this was good timing to get this resource on board.
So this will enhance Olga's or replace?
No, what it is if you have to redo so many journal entries during an audit, the auditors are starting to cross the line of not being, they're doing your accounting for you. So to have you want it to be a clean audit without having to go and adjust a lot of journal entries.
Okay,
So Olga was getting uncomfortable that there was too many modifications. So she said, bring in a consultant to help, help with this next audit. And it'll be much cleaner by the time it gets to the auditor. So it's really to help out the district, not to help out Olga.
so basically we're editing it and then presenting it to Olga?
So what happened, they asked for something called the trial balance. And so we gave them a trial balance early on. The problem is we had 2 months of more bills rolling in, and every single time we get a bill that was for a service in the prior year, we have to do what's called the journal entry. And we ended up having too many. We shouldn't have given the trial balance until August, but they were asking for it, and Tommy gave it to them, but then we needed to adjust it because
Okay.
all these other bills came in, basically.
So a lot of it's timing?
Yes. And so, we have talked with Moss Adams, and we will not be giving him a trial balance until August, and they are aware of that. And they're coming August 17th to on site.
Eric, this is hourly rates on this. Do we have a cap on how much we expect, or have we budgeted how much we expect to spend on that?
Right, so the recommendation in here is that the board set an upper limit of what they feel comfortable with. I don't know that we would need to go more than probably something in the 40 to 50 range. I think that'd be, but this is a 2-year contract, so keep that in mind too.
Your recommendation?
Finance Committee recommends this.
Yes. And I think 40,000 cap would be fine.
Okay,
For over a 2-year period.
Or a 2-year period?
yeah, it's a 2-year
And
contract.
we could revisit that, of course, if we.
If we needed to, yeah, change orders are common.
Okay, is there any further discussion, questions?
Do you have any estimate of what the total cost of this is gonna be?
Well, it'd be capped over 2 years at 40,000.
Okay,
We don't, whether it's that high or not, we would
Right.
manage and know early.
Well, it could be if we get enough of the process straightened out that we wouldn't need their services in the second year.
Okay, so it could be half of so it could be 20,000 possibly.
Yeah.
Okay.
You agree with that? If we didn't,
Mm,
I mean, we only get.
We're just basically we're setting an arbitrary cap,
Right.
hoping that it's gonna come in under that. It could come in under that, or if it needs to go over, we come back to the board. But obviously, we're not gonna use them more than we need to. But based on these rates, having a person here for one workday is $1,600. So 20,000 over a year, well, not over a year, but over the audit period. If you think of it from that perspective, you're only getting 10 days. 10 full days, so.
But the intent is this is a temporary resource.
Correct.
It's not to retain this the next 10 years. So that's why I said, if we get more of the process cleaned up and in place, the audit goes cleaner. We probably need less consulting services,
Okay,
and then we wouldn't continue with this consultant long term.
okay. But you feel it's necessary this year, basically?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess in just in terms of leveraging the resources that we have and we're paying for out of this, how are we going to document what we learn and memorialize all of that into, a process that lives beyond a single person in a position? So then that way we don't have to pay $40,000 the next first time someone comes into this role.
Yeah, I think it's,
Yeah, so
and then Eric, yeah.
basically, Tommy has been building a desk manual. He came in there was nothing for him. So he's been building that. So anything he would glean would probably ever end up there, just like everything else we modify ends up in there.
Right.
His desk manual is extraordinarily thick, so I have no worries that any new process would not be well documented.
Good ROI.
Yes, I think so.
And that's,
And the
that's
next person in that position is going to have a much easier go than Tommy did.
what I mean. I see this as more of an investment in our future as opposed to a one-time fix in a lot of ways.
Yes, I
Yes.
agree with that. That assessment is correct.
That perspective, I will motion to approve this with a $40,000 cap.
Okay,
I'll second.
there's moved in second. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Okay. No one opposed? Okay. Good. We now move on to item F, the sanitary sewer management plan, and maybe the record for the longest document in a board package.
Yeah, we have this every 2 years. Don't worry. This document is.
Yeah, but it gets longer every year because it adds in the previous.
This is true. So biannually, we're required to update this document. This came due for us. And so we hired NV5, who does all of our wastewater mitigation management reporting program, which is monitoring our wells, checking the coliform levels, all those sorts of things as part of our waste discharge permit from the state. And so they were very familiar with our system. So we went with NV5 to complete this work. And they completed it in June. So we didn't have time to get it on any committee agenda. So apologies for that. But again, this is just a perfunctory regulatory requirement the district is required to do biannually.
Okay, are there questions about the process or the content?
Well, there is a question about the content. It has to do with the broader question of the board packet and um, I don't know I can only observe what our process is, but um, it's certainly not reasonable to receive this read it, process it, even skim it. Um, and so the packet also, although it dives deep into, I don't know, 5-year-old minutes, proposals and, biographies of key people at a consulting firm, but it doesn't provide what one might most obviously expect if we're going to talk, and maybe we're not going to talk, but if we're going to talk about sewage collection, spills and leaks and so forth, it doesn't give any context at all for if that is a problem at Kirkwood. Are there leaks? Is there spillage? It's well understood that our biggest fear, your biggest concern is aging infrastructure. And I imagine sewage is about as good an example of that as any other. We track I&I every month. And yet none of that is provided in the one-page top sheet. There's no context, no background. And
Right.
I just look at this enormous chunk of packet, and with 2-day notice to read it, she could have sent it 2 months and I still wouldn't have read it. And it just, I don't know what to do with it.
Well, let me,
If I may.
Okay.
The things you mentioned have nothing to do with the sanitary sewer management plan. If we had a spill, because of aging infrastructure, this plan provides us with a framework for addressing the spill. It doesn't talk about,
The aging infrastructure itself.
Correct. This is, if, what would be a good analogy for you? I mean, if your car breaks down, you're going to take it to the mechanic. If the sewer leaks, we're going to go to this plan and it's how we're going to fix it. Has nothing to do with the other things you mentioned. And quite frankly, outside of a registered professional civil engineer, almost no one's going to understand this report, but we have to bring it before the board for adoption. So it's a very heavy document and very technical document. And it's really designed for wastewater operators and civil engineers. And we feel good about using big fancy words to describe these things, but it's required in there. So
that's new to me. It is required. It's not an option to have all this content in our board packet. That seems to be the case?
it has to be approved by the board, and as you'll notice, there's also, we're late on this, right? Because it's supposed to be done every 6 years.
that was biannually. Maybe I'm thinking.
Well, there's a couple
Oh.
different things, yeah.
Yeah, it's the wildfires biannually. You're correct.
What if I had a really just most basic question about this whole agenda item, which is, okay, so there's a new state requirement. There's a new policy in place that Derek and team have put, how is it different? Is it stricter? Should we sleep better at night knowing that this policy is in place? What's the answer to that?
The answer is the old policy is just as good as the new policy, but because of new requirements, we have to include new things in here that we didn't have to include the last time we did it. And the time before, we had to include things that we didn't have to do the time before that. The state's always adding things and unfunded mandates, and we're just stuck that way, unfortunately. But yes, there are new things that we have to address in this plan, or ways of addressing problems have to be enumerated in this plan that never had to be enumerated before. Because it was not this, it wasn't quite this thick before. I guess I lied before, Bob, but it was still a pretty
Right.
thick document.
Well, and as Derek mentioned, the SSMPs are every 6 years, and the last plan was 2014. So we don't want to spend multiple board meetings discussing this. We want to get it in, and
Should we ever spend a board meeting discussing the state of aging sewage infrastructure?
sure.
Is that something that,
That is coming up.
that's the
Sure.
master plan for sewage?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly right. Yep.
Right,
Q3, Q4?
right.
Yeah, I'm getting a proposal from Peterson Brewstead right now. They're just refining the scope and fee.
Okay,
So,
good. Then we just consider this perfunctory and somewhat out of proportion with the page count.
Totally.
Okay,
yes,
understood.
yes, that is a good summation.
Just a
quick question. It is every 6 years, but a lot of like the appendix and things like that have a lot of reference to individuals and phone numbers and contacts. Does that mean that we need to?
We
update that?
update,
Is that clerical
yeah,
stuff? just
that's
gonna get-
clerical stuff not readopted by the board.
Okay.
Yeah, so operators, yeah, we just had one of our operators just passed his grade 3. That will be added. That will be added to this plan, within a month, actually. So,
Great.
yeah, those all get updated.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, what about from the enthralled audience? Any sewage management questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
Good.
Just curiosity.
just curiosity, cool. Is there a motion then to approve?
Yeah, I'll move to approve it.
I'll
Okay.
second it. I'm so enthusiastic about this.
Okay, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Then all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes. All right, next we're on the wildflower plan. Page 252.
Thank you, Bob. Just gonna hold my finger down for a little while. We've almost got it. Okay. Again, perfunctory thing that we have to do, but a new requirement this year is it had to be reviewed by an independent third party. And also our attorneys also looked at it. So we had AFPD perform the review for us. I believe they did that at no cost, Rick, to us, which was very nice. We very much appreciate Chief Withrow doing that for us. He concurred with wildfire mitigation plan, and we recommend adoption and passage of resolution 2404.
I didn't have
Are
really
there-
any content questions, but there were a couple of things in terms of like the table of contents has an error in it. And things just like the dates are mismatching on the footers and stuff like that. So
Okay.
you could clean that up before finalization. I think that would be
Yeah.
good.
Rick, you have that.
Says version 2 on the cover and then version 1 in the document, things
Sure.
like that. Just it'd be nice
Just,
to keep it.
just
nice and
send me a
clean.
quick email on that, and I'm happy to make those de minimis changes for sure. Thank you.
I think
And the missing bookmarks
that's what I'm saying.
on page 257.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there other questions on the document? Not hearing any. And how's the clearance this year? Have we already done our inspection for tree clearance?
Yes, the inspection's done and we have the faller in ready to go. It's just a matter of getting him scheduled out. As well as invalid trees, which we also, same tree faller will take care of some of the hazard trees the fire chief has identified.
Any idea of how many trees? or-
No.
No.
Out Valley or in Valley?
Well, I'd probably.
Out Valley, I think we were at 40-ish, 48, yeah.
Just-
In Valley, I think we're about dozen to 2 dozen.
We're working with Forest Service for their
Right.
final review with GPS.
We have to GPS locate each of them, provide them with the coordinates, et cetera.
Significant amount of trees.
The Beatles have been busy.
Yeah. We're sitting on time bomb.
Okay, are there any questions? No, okay, is there a motion to approve the resolution 24-04 in the wildfire plan?
I'll motion to approve it with the clerical adjustments to be made.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. We're now on the new government requirement, the latest, workplace violence and prevention program. Item H on page 279.
Well, I'll be covering this. So essentially the state's mandated through State Bill 553. I gotta type it. It's either 553 or 533.
553.
55.
533,
Okay, my second
2 3s.
second paragraph is wrong. But anyway,
Oh,
the state actually sent a template out to all the companies, districts, to review, and then we started on that template and also used our insurance company's template to combine to ensure that we're meeting the elements of State Bill 553 within this new workplace violence prevention plan that's presented to you in the board packet. We had internally had staff review this document as well, and we'll be hopefully with board approval, presenting this document to our employees to include with our injury illness prevention plan, our IIPP, which again is required by the state. So before you is the district's workplace violence prevention plan. Happy to take any questions.
I have a couple questions.
Go ahead.
All right. So I read that the reporting structure for this is that you can go to the manager or you, I guess the administrator, which would be you in this role,
Yes.
right? Or you can go to law enforcement directly. If I'm recalling correctly, there are other, we have I thought we had an HR party that we had hired for other situations potentially, where there's like an ombuds process that they could go to that I think came to the board. If I'm remembering that correctly, which you can confirm or deny, but how is that different, or why is it different in that regard for this?
They are only responsible for basic human resource stuff. This is a different component. And actually, they're one of the entities that sent us the template that we ultimately used.
Okay.
The template was created by attorneys from AQUA, which is Association of California Water Agencies, California Special Districts Association, and CPS was somehow involved with both of them in creating this template, and all their lawyers reviewed it, and we have all the necessary elements in there. Aside from that, CPS had no real role in it except for making sure we adopt it. But CPS, law enforcement is going to be a quicker response, and Rick is going to be here, is going to be a quicker response than calling CPS, who the lady we deal with most often works out of Sacramento. And,
Right.
may or may not be available, whereas 911 or Rick will be working. So it makes more sense to go that way, especially for this sort of issue.
Sure. And I guess I just make sure it's clear to staff. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, it sounds like there are different processes for different scenarios, maybe. And I just want to make
Staff
sure.
still has access to CPS HR. They all have her phone number, all have her email.
Okay.
So if they have questions in the area she would be able to respond to those still. We still have them retained annually.
Okay. Second question was, it says a lot of this is just general, like KMPUD will act, like investigate, will do things. And I guess this ties into my last question, which is, what does that mean in practice? Is that, because if you go to law enforcement, does that come back to us, or does law enforcement investigate? Like, how does that play out? And I guess from our perspective as the board, how and when would we be given notification, understanding that there are other logged issues or some investigation happening, or, these are very serious matters. So I'm trying to understand how that workflow would work in the language it's written.
If it went to law enforcement, they would take the lead, and we would, once they had finished and concluded their thing and issued their report, then we would follow our steps. There's notification of all employees. Board members are not considered employees, but they are required to be notified.
Okay.
So board members would be notified just like any employee would. And that, if you read up towards the later
Yeah,
portion of
okay.
it about the notification stuff, that would also apply to the board.
And it's a way to formally document incidents.
Sure.
If, say you had a customer who was completely angry and they started elevating, this would be a way to document this, bring law enforcement if we needed to, and then obviously inform all our employees, which is the most important thing. The other part of this document is just a general snapshot of how the district is security-wise. Currently we keep the door closed. You can ring the bell for service. We open it up for meetings and so forth. We have cameras. So there are things that are in place now that are really good. But if we ever wanted to include panic buttons at the front desk or do other things, this is a way for the employees to communicate back to us for improvements, as well as maybe making modifications and changes in the future, if needed.
Chris, did you have a question?
I do. If I realize that this is a fairly procedural, it's a requirement. But if we're going to talk about workplace violence, could I simply ask the broader question? You mentioned you'll present this to staff and employees. Being new, I just don't know. How will staff respond to even the mention of a workplace, of a violence process procedure? Another way to ask that is there a sense that this is a very safe, violence-free workplace? Have there been incidents in the last 3 years that of workplace violence that are top of mind for people? Or is this kind of something that the employees will respond to this thinking, well, of course, this is an issue in society and on TV, but it hasn't come home to roost?
Couple of things. One, our employee handbook already has a hostile work environment and procedures and plans on how to address those, either by management or the employee. So this will be not unfamiliar with to the employees that we're going to talk about this and address this, as well as the state's been marketing this and announcing that workplace violence is important. And luckily, we're a very small district and we haven't had any incidences in the last several years. We've had some peripheral incidences toward the district, but internally we have not. And so,
But violent, I mean, I've heard, I don't know what's true and what's gossip, but I've heard stories of threats from outsiders, relative family members of employees or ex-employees. But generally, I mean, I assume that the employee staff feels this is a safe workplace.
yes.
And these incidents are incidental, or they're long in the past, or
I think the important thing is they were well managed. Whether a threat is real or just whatever it is, they've been well managed and people have been informed. And we've done the maximum to make sure that the threat is understood.
okay.
And this ended up being a lot of,
And even if we
Yeah.
had zero incidents since the inception of the district in the eighties, we still would have to adopt this plan. It
Oh, I totally
doesn't
understand that.
care about reality. It's just, we have to do.
I'm
that.
only asking what the general vibe and perception is. The door is locked, and that's for safety reasons. Is that correct?
So
No more questions.
And I guess the comment I'd make is that permanent?
I would, if it were my vote, I would say yes. We've accommodated every customer that's come to the door and rang the bell. And we invite them up and we discuss district daily business with them. But it's the unknown person, the person that comes in off of Highway 88 that we're not familiar with and have ill intentions. That's just one more barrier that our staff has to keep them out. Not to say it's ever going to happen, but it is a nice security to have.
When did we start doing that? Recently or a long time ago?
2020.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the pandemic. Is
that
where it
was the
started.
starting point.
That's correct. And then we polled employees internally if they would like to reopen it, and there was unanimous of keeping it the way it was, and it's worked well. I mean, we get, I think this month, well, July is obviously the busy weekend, but you know, count UPS, and if you don't count UPS and FedEx, 2-3 people come with legitimate business per month.
And really not an unusual practice. Both our insurance company as well as AWA, they have front doors that you get buzzed in by the front desk receptionist. Our receptionist happens to be upstairs who has a Zoom camera. So if someone's at the door, CJ or staff will find out who it is and help them out. So.
Well, I will simply say that, and you've probably heard stories like this from other resorts, ski resorts and recreational resorts that have a district. Sometimes just the physical location of the office, the accessibility of the office or a customer-facing rep from the district, if not the leadership of the district. If that's just like right there at Red Cliffs, for example, people are coming and going, and I'm not making any recommendation, just the obvious that that does change the relationship perhaps between district and community management, and might create more of a what? I don't know, open dialogue, get more feedback. Enough said, I'm done on this topic.
So what if
Okay.
the state decides to change its policy
With regards to what?
to mandating, to allowing, don't we have to renew this at every meeting? Or is that just for the,
That's different. Yeah, that's just to be able to have remote meetings.
The emergency room
Okay.
and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the AB 361, yeah.
Yeah.
okay, I was.
Yeah, that's- yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terry, I think
Just
there's
for
2 or
clarification.
3. I think there's 2 that apply to Kirkwood, 2 states of emergencies that are still on the books for the governor and the county.
Yeah, one is coming off soon.
Uh-oh, don't tell me that.
Which one is coming up?
Can't remember which one.
The
Oh,
flood, the
okay.
flood one probably.
Yeah,
Okay, are there other questions specifically to item 9H? Not, is there a motion? So,
So moved.
Yeah, I'll second.
okay, moved by Doug, second by John. All in favor, say aye. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're ready. For,
I think that this
Staff reports.
cover page is in under.
Yeah, when something's 9I, I do I as some things are subsequent, so they can easily get flipped around. So that's
okay.
probably my mislabeling for Carrie. Can you tell me
So
what page the
if you-
staff
We'll start on
report?
page 316,
Thank you, Bob.
which is the overview of what we want to cover.
I think probably the most important thing to do is just go through what we've done from the board direction in March and where we're at on that. So probably just start, I guess, there.
Want to do background first? Jump back.
Either one.
So in the staff report on 316, as Paul mentioned, in March, the board directed staff to address the 5 elements, which I'm not going to go through all of them. Since March, staff has gone out and done the following. We've solicited for 3 responses for requests for proposals for 218. And as you know, we selected for the capital projects approval, a company that came in around $40,000, Francisco and Associates, who scored the highest within our review. We also worked with district council to talk about the formulation of a 218 of a new entity through the 218 process. And then within the board packet is the council's comments. We also looked into and discussed assistance by hire, essentially hiring CAL FIRE or Amateur Fire Protection District and or Alpine County, and have had verbal conversations with each of those entities about, would you be willing to offer us a contract for fire services? Not unsimilar than what we did before Measure E, but again, continue those conversations. And then finally, there are still ongoing conversations with Kirkwood Mountain Resort on what services they can provide. They do provide us with an excellent Epic Promise grant, which helps us produce, typically over $30,000 every year for the fire department for equipment. So they're very supportive in that way. But again, there was a subcommittee that talked to Ricky Newberry as well as Tom Fortune and others to see if there was more that can be done to help support the fire department. But in conclusion, there were other things. Number 6, alternative funding, looking at TOT. And then again, looking at our mutual aid agreements. Are they satisfactory? Is there a way to solicit more revenue through mutual aid? And then finally, the last item was grants. And so staff has reviewed all this stuff and we just would like to get some more direction from the board on how to proceed forward. The need for funding for the fire department is obviously dire, but also there are numerous challenges right now with the fire department, which I can talk about in the operations report. I'm happy to discuss it here now, but
I'm just didn't know. Tell them what's been going on.
okay. I'll just give the example of last month. For the month of June, we had a total of 7 calls. And one of those calls, we had nobody respond from the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. No one was available. No volunteer was here to help. So the call was actually handled by Eastern Alpine County, who came up and cleared the alarm call. And I think I briefly mentioned it at the last board meeting. But we're relying on others to take care of our residents here in the valley. 3 of the 7 calls were responded by one Kirkwood volunteer who was not certified or qualified to do really anything other than to maybe talk on the radio. There were two volunteers that responded as a single resource, and both of them, I commend them for doing what they did and trying, but that puts a huge liability and risk on, I think, the department as well as on. I'm very concerned about their safety and well-being if they're going out on a single resource, if something happens to them, or they make a bad judgment and the patient gets hurt, or it's just not a good way to run the department. For the on-call schedule last month, there were 120 opportunities for people to sign up to be on call. And as you know, we've increased this on call to essentially $100 for a 12-hour shift. 21 of those shifts were not taken. So essentially 20% of the calls last month, there was nobody here to take them.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry, we've increased the stipend to X,
$100 a shift.
100 a shift. And the number of. that
There
you
were
guys-
eligible shifts were 120.
Yeah.
So 4 shifts a day. Even with that enticement, which is a heck of a lot more of a stipend than Alpine County and others offered, it still was not enough to get people here when I needed them, which is the weekends, because those calls were not covered on Saturdays and Sundays and Friday nights, and it was on Monday as well.
The percentage of the number of the 120 that went unfilled, you said it, I'm sorry.
21.
21 were unfilled, and most of those were in the most important times, weekends.
Typically, when people are up here enjoying
Thank you.
the
Got
summer,
it.
is the weekends. And so that said, the default, like last year, like May, is me. I get a call from Douglas Dispatch and say, hey, we've toned you guys 3 times. Is anybody going? So then I have to triage and try to do this. For example, last night on 2 occasions at 10:27 and 1:30 in the morning to try to figure out, is anybody here? There's nobody here. So the person that was here didn't get the call. And I'm asking Eastern Alpine County and talking to the Alpine County chief from Eastern Alpine County, Paul Worsham, hey, do you have anybody who can send up from Markleyville or Woodfords to come cover Kirkwood? Or I'm getting out of bed and doing it myself, and it's not working. So we are desperate to get some board direction, how to move forward, because I have some serious concerns in how we operate. And I've got 18 volunteers on the book, and I appreciate everyone, especially 2 of my captains that are in the room now, who are very dedicated. And when they're available, life is great. But when they're not, or if I'm not available, we are high and dry, and we're at a point where I would almost recommend dissolving or temporary suspending operations with the fire department until we can resolve this issue, because it's.
You said when you're there, things are great. It's not great when the phone is ringing at 10 and even at 1 in the morning. Is it in the packet, some sort of call list, like it came on this day and it was of this nature? Like, is that information that's already here?
No,
No,
it's not.
could you give just a couple of examples? You mentioned the time that you got called last night, but the types of calls, the type of emergency, are some of them 5-alarm fires? Every call I'm sure has some importance, but some are more important and urgent than others.
So I do have a list of units on the packet. I can just briefly go over what type
A
of calls
couple
and
of
times
highlights.
to give you an idea. So on June 9th at 8:58 PM, 1120 Kirkham Meadows Drive, we had an auto water flow alarm.
An auto water.
Meaning the alarm system for the whole building was turned on because the water system saw a signal where maybe a sprinkler had popped or there's a problem with the system.
Okay.
That was the call that Eastern Alpine County came up for. And luckily it was a compressor that went bad and caused a low water pressure in the system and set the alarm off. On the 16th at 9:34 AM at Places Resort, campsite number 5, where's a medical aid for an 81-year-old male unresponsive.
At Places Resort.
We had a single responder go to that call. On 6/17 at 4:40 PM, Cables Lake Resort. Again, a 68-year-old male unresponsive. That actually was an Eastern Alpine County call, and they called us for assistance. And So we were able to respond with that. 6:23 at 4:31. Someone fell at the potholes, was injured. During that call with one single unqualified first responder from the fire department, there was another injury on the call. So we actually had two calls at the same location, and it was another firefighter who came to do mutual aid, fell and took their shoulder out. On the 27th, there was another auto flow alarm. And then finally, on the 30th, a week later, another call to the potholes for a female not feeling well. And on that particular day, because the call was responded to a week before, a similar call by one person, my two captains stepped in and said, okay, we're going to cover the shifts this weekend because we're available. And they did. And they was a 3 or 4 that would hit that call. Four. So we had 4 Kirkwood people, did an excellent job. Were commended by Alpine Amador County, Amador Fire Protection District, as well as Cal Fire. Hey, you guys did an excellent job on this call. And yeah, we can do a great job if we're here.
Yeah.
But I can't guarantee volunteers are going to be here. So
I've asked this question before, and I urge you to tell me, don't ask it again if it's not relevant, but I tend to think of a difference between in Kirkwood and around Kirkwood. Places, potholes, those are external to Kirkwood. Fire alarms or something more urgent, even here in Kirkwood, I tend to think of as different. Is it fair, given the mission of KVFD, to even draw this distinction?
No. No, that could be a Kirkwood resident who happens to be driving here.
Well,
It's mutual aid.
And there's the mutual aid that's required in order to.
mutual aid is required.
Well, we all need it because we're not all available at all the time. And so that's what it means to be a responsive fire department, is you
Okay,
cover an area that's reasonable
okay,
within your reach.
okay,
Not
that's,
say, gee, you made a right turn on the freeway, sorry, call someone else.
no, that's,
mean,
that's
these are
why I
people.
asked.
They're actually,
Yeah.
those response areas are covered in the mutual aid agreements. They are defined
Yeah,
of where we go to, how far we go.
So defined, even so it's our obligation. If we're gonna have a fire department, then we're obliged
We
to
have a
consider potholes.
contractual mutual aid agreement.
Yeah, okay,
AFPD will respond up to here and we cover them down to, I guess, Places is a tragedy, I guess.
it goes both ways because we
And
need their help too.
Yeah.
yeah,
So it goes both ways.
okay, thank you. And I will not
So,
make that distinction.
I've thought about this meeting. I want to suggest a structure for the conversation and what we would ideally see if we're ready to decide today, because the staff have done their list of things we asked them to do from the TAC. So this is a decision point. So the first point I want to start out with is the current structure is completely dependent on having a volunteer fire chief who just happens to be our assistant general manager. And if we didn't have that structure, we would have no way to operate. So we are on borrowed time, and we're asking Rick to do things that I think go beyond what's reasonable to ask. And he's done pretty much everything. The volunteer structure is a real problematic if it's not snow season. In ski season, it's still a problem, but it's not as big a problem because there are people living here, and there is mutual stuff that we can work out with Kirkwood Mountain Resorts. But in the summer, there aren't people here, so our ability to staff, as you've seen, is a real problem.
It's
So
harder to staff in off season is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right, because there aren't people here,
Coming and going.
and there are seasonal employees in the winter that also serve in the fire department in responsibility. So the structure we have right now is overly dependent on one person, and that's unfair, and it's not going to last. And so something has to change. We either can have a fire department here, and we just count on the counties to show up, or we have two options. It really comes down to, and both of them can only be done if we increase the funding. So at our current funding level, we run a deficit with the extra $100, with the extra stipend, the rest of that. We don't have enough money to even continue for more than about another year or so of what we're already doing. So we have two options. One option is to see whether Amador Fire Services would be willing to do this as an outsource they would staff it and provide it. And we don't know whether they're fully willing to do that, to sign a contract, and we don't know the price. But judging from what happened a year ago, we would say that 1.2 million is probably the starting point. And we don't, so it's somewhere in that or more. And we don't know for sure whether they would actually sign a contract. And that's not because they aren't friendly, but they have plenty to do already without us. The second option is to have paid professional staff physically here. And that would consist of a minimum of fire chief, some number of full-time firefighters, and possibly some part-time together with volunteers, because it would make a really big difference if we know for every hour a day there is a trained professional firefighter here. That changes things substantially, and it's not sufficient to enter a building in a fire. It's not sufficient to do a lot of things, but it's kind of the minimum to make sure we could actually respond. So those are our two options, assuming no one wants to wind down, which I think would be exceptionally dangerous situation. So if we want to do this, first of all, if we want to have employees of our own, we can't do it under the current district structure because they would have to be part of CalPERS, and that creates a number of problems if you're a firefighter. So the way we would create a separate structure would be to approach Alpine LAFCO and request an independent structure. And that structure would be dependent on funding. So we would ask for that. That would be the structure that would operate the fire department. And it would allow them the flexibility to choose an appropriate service, retirement service, et cetera. So that's
Not CalPERS.
no, we can't. For reasons which we can cover later.
Yeah, that's
CalPERS is not an option that works for safety personnel. And correct me if I'm,
Well, we're talking to CalPERS now about creating an amendment to our existing CalPERS contract to become a safety CalPERS organization. And the initial job descriptions were sent to them, and now we're waiting for them to tell us, hey, how much is this really going to cost us? But there are some limitations with doing that.
so miracles do happen. Something might work out, but in most likelihood, we'd want to have an independent structure. Either of those require funding. And so the remaining choice that we have for funding is really a 218 process to analyze things and see whether the community will support and what it would look like to have a new fire assessment fee. So the way that would work is we would have to, in parallel, figure out what a going forward plan would be under either of those two options, what the details actually are, so we can come up with an amount that we need. We would use this agency to figure out what the beneficial value is to every property owner. And the way this would work is every property owner in Kirkwood, whether it's improved or not, would get an assessment based on the benefit of this. And that would be subject to a vote. And the way the vote would work is your vote is proportional to your fee. So if someone has a $500 fee and someone else has $1,000 annual fee, the other one, their vote is twice the value of the other vote. So it's based on the property's assessment, proposed assessment. The vote would consist of whoever chooses to send in their mail ballot. If 50% of those plus one, based on prorated for the assessment value, vote in favor, then we would have the ability to start the fee. We could then create the LAPCO and we could start to build. But that's the process. So what we need to talk about today is particularly whether we want to proceed with the 218 process, and we have a quote and somebody who's ready to get started. We would use that to figure out exactly which money we want to raise, what structure we really want to do in parallel. They would start out by pulling together all of the information on all the properties, which our experience with the county clerks and that is, it takes a little bit of work to pull that together. We concurrently figure out how much we want to ask for. We then figure out with the community what the support level was. There would be a ballot and then a decision. Concurrently, we'd find out whether LAFCO will support creating an independent district conditional on funding. So that's the structure of where we are. And
One question, the
yeah.
voting protocol you described.
Yeah.
Or the notion of benefit versus dollar assessment, is that all like LAFCO procedure or where does
No,
that come
that's
from?
218 procedure.
What's
It's
it?
all written in California statute.
Okay, so that's determined by
Yeah,
that.
so we would follow exactly. And the rule is you can't be charged more than than the benefit you're receiving. And so an engineer figures out what the benefit value is to each individual property.
And it will be specific to each property, not groups of properties, like a house this big, all houses are equal, every single house will have its own number.
Well, every house will have its own number, but they would figure out what are the characteristics.
Yeah.
Look
Yeah,
for common
like Parameter
characteristics.
County, they use things like the type of property. Is it vacant land? Is it agriculture? Is it industrial? Is it residential? Is it multifamily? So that was one factor they applied. Another one that was really not intuitive is if you live closer to the fire services in Antelope County, you got more benefits, so you're assessed higher, which wasn't intuitive to me, because I thought, well, the crew's got to drive further.
Yeah.
It's more costly to service
Yeah.
a more distant one, so that was a criteria. There's a lot of controversy about that because industrial kind of got lumped together. Where you could have a Walmart, and then what they argued about in their board meeting was a Walmart is an industrial property, and they've got somebody's got a hot dog stand.
If you have two
Yeah, how
equal
do you treat
houses,
those?
if you have two equal houses, equal size, one just is constructed different, more expensive to replace whatever, then you'll get different numbers, different benefits.
I mean, that's what this consultant.
Well, we don't want to speculate on what they would
okay.
find,
But
and there's a lot more uniformity here in its small area and everybody's nearby.
Yeah.
Than it would be to looking at Amador County. So I think we have a simpler situation. Just because of the size.
it is a smaller area. We do have one large commercial enterprise here, so that is different than that could create a difficulty, but the consultant would figure all that out.
Right.
Can I ask you a couple of questions, maybe to take a step back, Bob, because you went straight to the two things you mentioned, but during the chat, there were a lot of questions around like, why doesn't the status quo work? And you mentioned obviously that it's dependent on Rick. So let me ask Chief Ansel here. I mean, on our current volunteer staff, like, do we have a pipeline of two capable captains that are here today? Like, how far would they be away from being able to fill in as a volunteer fire chief? Like, do we have people in a progression just to help us understand where the state of the department is beyond your fire chief abilities, basically? How far away is that from happening?
So every single volunteer I have would have to meet the state requirements.
Yep.
And it would have to be on their own time. I mean, we would, through the 501c3 scholarship program, we're happy to reimburse them. But, it takes, it's essentially a 6-month course for firefighter one. For wildland course, it's a little bit easier. It's mostly done online, but there is pack tests and skill requirements that you have to satisfy. So that's typically a 3-month process. As an EMT, you need a minimum amount of state hours to become a EMT basic level, not a paramedic, but just a basic EMT. So you're looking at essentially 2.5 years to get someone certified, trained for a basic firefighter level. And then as an officer, there are multiple courses that you have to complete to, again, do the job. So it's all dependent on how much time a volunteer might have to do it. And I've only had 2 or 3 that have successfully completed the fire one, the basic academy and the EMT. And guess what? They've moved on and got hired with real jobs, real firefighting jobs. That one works for Cal Fire, one works down in the Bay Area. And so I feel good. It's a success story. We were the stepping stone for them, but that's kind of what we're looking at. And so,
So just to summarize, then we're multiple years from today. If we had volunteers in the department today who wanted to take the step to try to come to that, it would take multiple years to get there. And to have to coincident with the time and availability to do the training.
But Doug, I would just extend that by saying that assumes they're interested in it as a profession. Right? I mean, that would be the motivation.
Sure.
And if we had the ability to actually hire people, then they would have the experience of being surrounded by people that have already completed the work. And so the ability for a volunteer who wanted to go find out if they wanted to be in this or move in that would be enhanced by having more professionals.
Right. And would also, yeah, yes, for sure. Second part of this, Amador Fire Protection District as an option. We didn't talk about Eastern Alpine in terms of they have a full-time fire chief, mostly volunteer staff beyond that as well. Talk about what that is there a relationship there in relation to how we might work with Amador Fire Protection District that might work, just to make sure that we've covered these bases in terms of our options. What would that the option look like if it could exist at all?
We've had several conversations with Wayne County, going back to what 2009, I think it was. And possibly there's an option there, but again, they have one paid fire chief and then one part-time paid assistant chief. So their model is similar to ours, but it's about funding and I'm not sure if they would have the ability to bring on more, but maybe. And I think the dialogue or the question should be asked, as well as we've talked about CAL FIRE, who may be able to provide assistance by hire, a contract to the district, but typically their price is a lot more if you ask around some of the chiefs as well as look at some of the websites. But I think all options should be explored and not, pigeon this hole into asking just one agency like Amador Fire Protection District.
There are others we might go to.
Well, we've been to all of them.
Yeah,
We've been to all of them a few times,
yeah.
but we could certainly ask them for a formal proposal or are willing to offer a formal proposal to provide services. They could just say no, or they could say, yeah, this is what it's going to be.
Well, I guess one of the things that we heard through the TAC was having a full-time fire chief was like a basic. I feel like, at least my interpretation of the results, that was a basic movement in that direction. We had a majority of people, I think, towards that idea. I guess I'd bring up the Eastern Alpine just because if we could supplement that process, that would solve the full-time fire chief and the volunteers, but I mean, it wouldn't solve all of our problems with coverage and things like that, certainly.
It would replace me. At some point I will retire, either from the fire department or from the district, but it won't gain you more people that are available on a Saturday or Sunday.
Right.
Unless they have a depth of volunteers in Eastern Alpine County, but they have the same challenges where there's the 2 or 3 that come.
Yep.
And
Understood. And I'm also just trying to think about, like, is there a progression? Is there staging where that could be a immediate thing that we could figure out, or that I don't know.
I think the important point for today's meeting is deciding whether, unless we're phasing this out, we have to have more funds. And we can't possibly decide today exactly what that structure is going to be or what we need, but we need to do that in parallel with the 218. So by the time they need to know the amount, we have an idea of how we want to proceed. That's what I see happening at the meeting today.
You described the options, and if I could just tell me if I
Yeah.
missed something, one was to outsource, and the only really feasible one I hear is Amador. 1.2, we don't know if it'd be more today, and it would take a long time to finalize. The other option was professionalize our own KPFD. We can't then remove the V. We can't do that in our current structure at the PUD, so we'd have to create a new enterprise, 218, LAFCO, all of that. There is no other option other than to suspend the service, or did I miss something?
So on the second point, we can do it and take on CalPERS, PEPRA, safety. We can do that and have our own paid firefighters.
Oh, we could make it work in the
We
existing
could,
structure, but
But What I can tell you is all my neighbors that live down in Pioneer and guys that live in Pine Grove and guys that live in Cedar Creek, they're commuting on a 3-4 or a 4-3 work schedule to San Francisco, to the Bay Area. And we would have to match Bay Area wages.
Right.
Because once we go into Pepra, we're competing with the big boys. And so there's nothing to say we can have a lower salary. So we could do it. There's a, call it a 2B. But yes, we could do it, but it would be extraordinarily costly.
Pepra implies it's CalPERS pensions and all of that.
CalPERS
Union.
Pepra is, man, it was implemented 2018,
So, yeah.
and it was the Public Employees Pension Reform Act.
Okay.
Did I get that right, Terry? Thank you.
Pretty much it.
And that, so everybody, so you, right now, Rick and myself are CalPERS Classic. We're the old formula. Nobody can come into that unless you're already in it.
I know we've covered this in previous meetings. I apologize. Thank you. Was ever Doug, in the course of TAC, was there a pro forma done on different scenarios to professionalize some of the department? It's X $100,000 at
Yeah, I
least.
mean, that's what the survey was. I mean, basically was looking at the different options, and I'm looking at it now, and I think, you look at the percentage of people who wanted to pay 5X was about 56% of the population. Who filled out the survey said they'd go to 5X of what the current price was, would result about 325,000 per year more. 23% wanted no change. And then you have 14 and another 5, so about 20% who said they would even go beyond 5X. So, I think in terms of, I think this kind of leads to my other main concern is Measure E failed in a lot of ways because we asked for, there's an issue, we need to see money up to this amount, and I'm nervous about how, there's a lot of open questions still. I realize that we have to do the teaching, but I'm worried that if we go down this road, it feels a lot like, I don't know. Do we know what we're getting ourselves? Will we be able to fund something at the dollars that we would need to?
You said there's 50+% for a $300-something-thousand increase, but how does that compare with the pro forma that it would cost us to do
We need a factor of 10 increase or
a
more,
factor? Oh, thank you. So we need
Okay.
$750,000 or something.
or more. Yeah.
Correct. And that's why survey results from 6 months ago are not indicative necessarily of
Well,
where
I'm
we go in
not
the future,
doubting the
but
survey results, but it doesn't close the gap.
Correct.
Basically, the survey question would be, are you willing to pay 10X or suspend?
I mean, if you look, let's just use 1.2. I think that's the wrong number. I think it's 1.5 now. Because we're 2 years further into it. So let's just use
Okay.
1.5. It's a better number. Just outsource. And if we went to CAL FIRE, it's probably 2 million. So let's use 1.5. I'm assuming somebody be willing to step in for that. We have, you just saw in the ops budget, I'm putting about 300,000 property tax against the fire budget every year. That's the proposal because of how good we got our electric rates. We've kind of fixed that, and let's take that. I think that's in perpetuity going to solve that problem. So I think I'm comfortable with 300 is the number. That means you're now 1.2 million short. So 10X, 5X. No, what do we get? 60,000 from our assessment.
Mhm.
So you need 200X. Sorry, 20X.
16.
Sorry, 200 would be nice, but
16X is what we put in the survey, right?
yeah, but
Yeah,
that's
so your survey results say that's not gonna pass.
As framed 6 months ago, and the scenario was, I mean, maybe if it's framed as we are closing it down versus this, those are your two options, maybe it would change. I'm just trying to come from the perspective of, it is important to do this. I do not want it to fail. And I want to make sure that we do not fall into the same traps we fell into with Measure E. So that as we're doing this, I do not want the community to think that, I want to make sure that we are going down the right steps in the right time, in the right progression to make sure that community is on board, they understand the situation. I mean, I appreciate the community that's here today to listen in and understand this, but we're in a tough spot here. I just feel like we have one more chance to get this right. With the time ticking on, Rick mentioned you might retire at some point, which is, terrifying, but it's like, we don't have much time. And so I want to make sure we get this right. And so I want to make sure that we're taking the appropriate steps, we're informing the community in the right ways and doing all of this. I don't want to come up with an open budget again, I guess is part of it too. It's like, hey, we need to do this.
Well, you can't do 218 with an open budget. There's a specific amount. There's a percentage for every property, and there's a specific amount, and then there's a vote. So in the time frame of doing that analysis, we need a plan for how we would ramp up the coverage.
And how much of that work does the consultant do? I mean,
In terms of getting,
I know and
figuring out the price, that's not on them.
No, as far as, like I think in Amador, they sent out personalized mock ballots. It said, this is gonna be whatever, $350 for your property a month or something like that. And they got the results of that mock ballot, and then they could go and do more work. So they didn't do all the communication, but they did some steps like that.
I mean, I'm glad both captains are about 2 out of 3 captains are here for Spencer. But we have 1 employee and 2 members of the public online, and we have 3 members of the public here. That's 5 out of 789 connections, and double that, so 1,500 people that own homes here. It's not a concern until it's a concern. And so how do we make it a concern, to paraphrase what you're saying?
Yeah, well, we make it
How do we
by
make people,
forming a temporary advisory committee and having community events instead of having an agenda item in a board meeting, I think, honestly.
except for no one's around to be at community events very often, Labor Day, 4th of July, New Year's. So that's, that won't work. So now what,
Yeah.
but your point's well taken. I also share your concerns that this is just gonna be a Measure E Part due.
I don't think it will necessarily has to be that. I want it to not be that.
I
I
want
want
it to not be that.
I want to
too.
take every step to make sure it is not that, and we're not
Okay.
doing the same thing, making any same mistakes that we did before. That's what I'm trying to say.
I'd like to suggest at this point, since there are members of the public here and online, if anyone wants to comment on the conversation so far, I'd invite them to do that. Sandy, I'm sorry, and then Larry.
Sandy Goldberg. I think the feedback from the tax survey was people do want to have a fire department and they want us to find a way to fund it. And it may not be at the highest level that would be optimal, but I really think that steps need to be taken to at least start down the path of funding it. And if the 218 is the way to go, then I think the board should consider that and start that process tomorrow.
Thank you. Larry, do you want to comment?
Started off describing the call outs, and many were outside the valley, and the tax is only affecting people in the valley. So how's that defined? If your response zone is this, but the tax group is the smaller bubble.
I'm going to ask that question, so I'll answer with the answer that was crystal clear, which is that it's the mission, and in fact, it's compulsory, being a fire department, that we have to consider our service area bigger than our taxable area. It just how it works, and in exchange, we get what's called mutual aid. Is there more to the answer?
And that's absolutely correct. And during Caldor, we had 13 or 14 LA County fire trucks in this valley protecting your homes.
Yeah.
So that's the trade-off.
That's mutual aid.
And quite frankly, we need our partners more than they need us. And we are not in the catbird seat. We are the tail on the end of that dog. We don't wag anything. And quite frankly, they could say, no, we don't want to do mutual aid with you anymore. And they wouldn't have to respond. We could quit responding. We wouldn't turn right out of Kirkwood, wouldn't turn left out of Kirkwood. And no one would respond. Last night, those 2 calls, those 2 medical emergencies for your neighbors who live here and pay taxes, no one would have responded. Zero, zilch, none.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I'm new to the KMA board and admittedly, I'll be, one of the reasons I joined is I've been enjoying Kirkwood for many years, enjoying and not giving back. Said it to get a little bit more involved and more informed. So I was very much the civilian during the surveying process, when that happened last year. And, I do think, Doug, I agree with you. I think it's gotta step outside of meetings like this and have more, and I don't know what the answer is to this, but have more events and more people every Saturday next year. People are coming through, and you look at the Kirkwood ski team, the way that, they'll put up their tents a couple times a season and be selling stuff and keep drawing people in. It's that type of activity. It's a campaign because people just aren't, if they're gonna be asked to spend this much more, they're gonna need to be brought along in a much more comprehensive way than, several emails. That's just my feedback as someone who very much was on the edge of this process last year.
Any other? Right. Is there any? I don't see any hands online.
No.
Bob, is this discussion moving at some point towards a vote today?
Yeah, the resolution would be to approve the contract to start the 218 process and to approve
That's right.
the evaluation of creating a separate independent structure through LAFCO and in the likely event that we might need it.
Are those not the same thing?
No, they're two different things.
I thought 218 leads us to LAPCO to propose.
No,
I misunderstood.
unrelated. Yeah.
Okay, so those are two different
So-
options.
Those are the two things.
218 is what you need to create the tax, even to do the 5X or the 10X or whatever it is. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then
We
you have
can't-
to decide how to spend it.
And then we
See.
likely will need a different independent structure. And so we would need to know how the rules are for setting that up, and starting that
When would the
process.
218 be ready for vote? 6
I
months?
mean, we'd have to get proposals first because, well, it depends which way we're gonna go to, but we should get proposals first. So we have an actual hard and fast number that some agency will hold for X for a year, a price that they'll hold for a year that we can rely on to then go into the 218. 218 would take 6 months at best.
Timing.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with your concerns, is do we have the time and the process in place to win support?
Yeah.
So I personally want to have a fire department here, and I've told this, that whenever these stories come up, I had a medical emergency at my house when I first moved in, and I was very happy to see Chief Ansel show up and take care of the situation, because otherwise I would be carrying one of my guests to my car, and it would have been a bad experience. So, but I do think we need to have a plan to build support for initiative. Yeah, that's why I asked when would a 218 be done, because that gives us our time frame for building support.
218 would be done. I think I heard 6 months roughly. But that just allows us to put something on a ballot. So then,
No,
Oh,
their
okay.
ballots are mailed individually. It's
at
not
the-
like going to the polls.
so at the end of this, if it were 6 months, at the end of that period, then we're almost within a meeting or two, within a month or two, we're able to begin revenue source. Is that true?
It would go up with the property tax bills, which go
Oh,
up.
probably.
It's not-
August, if
It
I'm
doesn't
not
have to be
mistaken.
property tax, right?
It's not the
We
PUD
currently
bill.
bill monthly, right?
Assessment.
It's not necessarily, yeah.
I don't know how that stands up against the current legal tests of how 218s need to be
Okay.
allotted.
So that's
Then we
another
would have to get
question.
an answer from Josh on.
Okay.
But it's hold your breath for less than 1 year either way. It's hold your breath for, I don't know, 8 months at best. May I ask, since we can't talk about this without the topic you brought up a moment ago, property tax from the two counties. You mentioned, I think it's in the packet, is it 300,000 that you've set towards KBFD. Could you repeat that again?
That's correct.
And so,
You got it.
oh, and I believe we get about 850, 900,000 in
900.
total.
Yeah.
900, let's say, the majority is from Alpine. Thanks for being here. Terry, you're from Alpine, right? Thank you. Could you just, I'm sorry, this is all remedial, maybe just for me, but the 900,000 roughly, if 300,000 goes to fire, and is that new? Was it less before?
It
Where,
was about 160 before.
thank you. What are the other big chunks? Where else does it go? It goes towards fund transfer,
Yeah, so it can go to governmental and enterprise funds.
right?
So it can go to water, wastewater, electric, propane. Employee housing is another one that the entire employee housing is offset by property taxes. Parks and Rec is 100% offset by property taxes. So roughly 150 for employee housing, 40. I can just go back up to it.
That's okay. No,
Okay.
It's all in the budget.
Let me just say this again, but just slightly different way. And during the TAC, we looked at budget, and what we came up with was the last question on the survey was we estimated that we could shift up to $250,000 of what we currently allocate to other services into fire, which would be in addition to what
in addition to the
in
300,
addition to Eric, and 65.7% of the people voted no to doing that.
because it would,
It would increase the prices of all the other services that are.
You have two ways to pay. You can pay through the assessment fee for what you're getting the value for, or we can charge more for utilities.
Yeah.
So I think we have sufficiently evaluated
Yeah.
the property taxes proportion
I mean,
in that regard.
we will be going into a water wastewater rate study, and this board, which is different than that board at that time, could decide. Right now, we allocate, I'm gonna get this slightly wrong, Bob, correct me. 93 is what we assume for water and about 230 roughly for wastewater. In the next rate study, the board could say, no more property tax, and then rates would have to go up to compensate for that. So the board could make that decision. But we're just, playing a shell game.
understood.
I mean, or, we can make a glide path to a decision, we can make a policy that we want to make all of our services self-sufficient from their own rates. And everything else from property taxes will go to.
Well, it is an odd situation to be subsidizing utilities with property tax, right? If you look at most
Right.
counties, it goes mostly.
The other way around.
Schools and other things around. And so I've had that conversation as well, and you use the word subsidized, and some would say not. I would argue it is. It's not, the rates don't service the full cost of the service that we're providing. So
Right.
we could make a policy decision that we move all this away, and then we would have many more hundreds of thousands, but still not enough to cover this gap.
Which of course points to the much bigger question that we won't talk about much today, except I feel it's important to mention. Why is the 900,000 not 1.9 million? In other words, why aren't we getting more money from the county than the counties than the 900K? I'll leave it at that, but that's a bigger topic for another day.
I mean, that topic's been revisited so many times.
It won't die until there's.
It won't die. They're basically, the counties, when we were formed, there were agreements made of what percentage we get. That's where we're at. It's never going to change. So anyone that thinks otherwise is probably Kirkwood High. If the other option is incorporation, that would pull almost all the property taxes back from the counties. But someone's gonna need to pony up $2 million to start that campaign, and that's not the function of the district, and we would not be able to lead that or take any position on that whatsoever. But that's really your only, if you want to get the property tax back, that's how you do it.
And you'd have all sorts of new expenses running.
Yeah,
as-
new
as a
expenses, dog
city.
catchers, we'd have to contract with someone for the animal control, we'd have to contract for law enforcement, and so on and so forth.
Can I ask a clarifying question on one of the things that I want to make sure I understand this fully is the CalPERS versus the traditional?
Sure.
Is the idea that we would, by having the second option, so the 218 and then the independent structure, that we would, is that hope, as you're sending this to CalPERS for the thoughts, is that we would then be able to have this under the old
Okay.
system, or, and so be therefore
No.
less expensive, or
No.
no? Okay.
No, I'll clarify that for
Thank
sure. It's a good question. First thing I'm gonna say is if we, Chris, if you were to roll slightly sideways to get out of the sun, you might want to do that.
I'll slide
So-
over.
So to answer that question, Doug. If we wanted to go the new district route, one would be an independent district with its own elected board. We would have no control over them, no jurisdiction over them, nothing. It would be completely independent, make their own decisions. It would be up to them to decide what retirement plan they want to do. Fingers crossed they won't go into CalPERS, because the whole point would be, let's not do that. That would be that's the first thing. So
It would no
hopefully they would
longer
do
be
some
PUD
sort of,
business.
what's that?
It would no longer be PUD business.
Nope, it would be a whole separate elected board that is not beholden to this district at all, brand new, independent. And so if we did the 218 and we did want to go the independent district route, we would approach Alpine County LAFCO and request from them that this district be formed only if the 218 passes. Because there's no reason to form the district if they have no funds. And then according to Josh's memo you saw, we could transfer the 218 to them. We could transfer those assets, the fire department assets to them, because ostensibly they're serving the same area and therefore it's not a gift to public funds. That's the independent one. So if this new independent entity decided to form and decided to go into CalPERS, then we've basically wasted our time.
Yeah.
But that would be their decision and we'd have no control over it. It leads us back
Yeah.
to the contract services. As we noted before, really the best option. Because AFPD and Eastern Alpine KMPUD has a structure in place, CAL FIRE has a structure in place with all their union contracts, all their salaries. They have paid employees. Yes, AFPD, they come and go and it's a great training ground and they get it for a couple of years and they're gone. Yeah, but they have the structure set up to do that. We don't. We can, but we would have to compete going back to CalPERS PEPRA. We'd have to compete with City of San Francisco. And we can't pay those kind of
And
wages.
there's no, yeah, that's what I was coming back to, is like, there's no world in which we are paying a lower wage potentially.
Not for a CalPERS PEPRA, no.
Right.
Now, this new entity, if they decided to go that route and they chose to not go into CalPERS and provide some other sort of pension program or a 457 matching program, whatever it is.
Or no pension at all, I guess.
No pension at all would go nowhere.
Okay.
But AFPD does a 457 with a huge match. That's how they do it. Then we become attractive to retired annuitants.
Right.
So our buddy Robert Withrow, 25 years CAL FIRE, he retired, getting his full pension from CalPERS and is now working for AFPD, earning a salary and a new pension. It's attractive. You know, these guys are retiring at 45 years old. Well, they want something to do. No, hey, I'll go. I like being a fire, battalion chief or whatever they end up retiring as, or just a captain. Yeah, I like doing that. I want to keep doing this, but this is a sweetheart deal. I'm going to double dip, ostensibly. That's how we can attract someone at a lower rate.
And or create an apprentice program where we take our two captains, for example, and introduce them into the program with,
With AFPD, right?
Yeah, either way, but basically feed them into the program, because there are countless hours of dedication and time for the department. I don't think the community recognizes, and like them, we are not paid. The district does not pay me to be the fire chief. My retirement is not associated as the fire chief. So.
Just to make sure I understood, part of the plan, if we outsourced to Amador or anyone else, would be a personnel enablement somehow, get them into the, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we want to take care of our own, so to speak,
Yeah,
but
and they're the best for Kirkwood.
and talking with Chief White in the past and I think with Rose as well, Amateur Fire Protection District, that they need us. They understand that we know the area, the buildings, the infrastructure,
Okay.
and so they don't want to dismiss our staff, but again, I want to make sure my staff is able, capable, certified to do the job as well.
I understand.
And they have a feeder training program for all their volunteers that would get those certs, maybe on a quicker route than trying to do it independently too.
Yeah.
And Eric, I heard you say 2 minutes ago, the outsourcing option, whether Amador or Eastern Alpine, is the preferred or best solution. But then I heard you talk quite a bit about a 218 that would be independent and not CalPERS PEPRA. If we could pull
218
that,
would have nothing to do with it. It would be up to the new
the new
district,
org.
the new board to do
And
it.
but are you saying that in your view, the outsourcing approach is a better approach even than that independent going non-CalPERS? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's a more viable approach. It's a more chance of success
What about timing if we're in a rush to solve this in 9 months, not 2 years? Is that equally fast or slow?
I don't know the answer to that.
Oh.
I don't know. I mean,
Lapco.
if you started a new entity. I mean, Alpine County LAFCO, hadn't met in 10 years, and then we met, and then we haven't met in a couple of years. I'm sure they could organize it and have it done pretty quickly.
Certainly hope so.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, TL is great. TL is great, but probably similar timelines between the two options.
Because the one AM calls keep coming till then, right?
It's gotta be close, 6 months to a year on that,
What
probably.
about the cost difference between those two?
They're the same.
Outsourcing versus.
To run a fire, yeah, to run a
1.5
fire
million.
department, it's 1.5 is the real number, I think, these days.
Right, so our options are, we do a 218 and pay to outsource it for 1.5.
Or we do it.
Or we
218
do a
and
218 and then
tie it to the
that LAFCO new agency that forms this new board that does it for 1.5.
I think we
Or-
vote now then.
There is a third option, or we do a 218 and get into CalPERS pepper safety. That is a third option
Under this current setup then.
under this board.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the third option. Then the fourth option is we suspend service, we divest.
What's I mean, we haven't talked as much about the third option of just doing the 218 under us and CalPERS PEPRA.
It's
It would be more expensive than.
It would be more expensive than outsourcing, I believe,
You believe.
Ultimately would be.
ultimately it would be.
And a lot of that has to do with training.
So I guess I'd be much more comfortable if there was a campaign plan.
Yeah.
And timeline.
Yeah.
Behind this, because the TAC results would say it's not gonna pass.
It's tough sledding.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, Measure E.
I'm sorry, TAC results would vote for suspend? Is there four options?
Well, everybody
Well, we
supports
wouldn't
the
support,
funding.
people do not vote to support this in the
That's right.
magnitudes that we have stated at that time in the survey context. I will argue that in the context of suspending service versus not, that might change things, but yeah, I mean, I was gonna say the same thing, is like, I don't think the motion here should be just do these two things. I think there has to be and you need to ask either a TAC or, like, take this on the communications, or whatever, to then put together, work alongside this to make sure that this is staged. We know what we're getting ourselves into, we're communicating effectively beyond just general board meeting notices, and we take this to the community and make sure people understand that the situation in full depth. And what we have done since the TAC suspended, a few months ago, what's happened, and I think that's the appropriate step to take.
Agreed. Could I ask another question? We talked 20 minutes ago about either you call a spade, you have a fire assessment tax, or you raise utility rates and transfer the money. Is there a reason to think that second approach of funding it through utility rate increases
It doesn't,
is a better approach?
there isn't enough money. So you have to do the 218 because there isn't enough money, no matter what you reallocate to cover.
Well, it would help. It would help.
It would change the
Right,
amount.
the more you
We
bring
could
the-
say,
The more
we're
you bring
gonna-
the 218 number
Yeah.
down, the easier it gets to pass, right?
well,
On the other
and
hand, you gotta get rate studies accepted as well.
you-
So if you go out with a rate study that says, hey, what'd you say, water gets 90,000.
93 and about 230, I think, for wastewater is.
Yeah, so if you say, well, your wastewater bill's gonna, we're gonna add 230,000 to the budget.
Right.
That's gonna be built into your rates, that's not gonna,
And
that may not go past our customer base either.
Put it all on propane.
there's a timeline to that too, right? Where it's like, to do the rate studies, to do all of this will take time in conjunction with when this could happen and when we run out of opportunity to have a service.
Yeah.
So. But I think, ultimately, we will need more money in it, even if you took $900,000, every penny of the property tax, you would still need more money. Yeah.
So I just so you may want to write this down, but as we go, so you can see for fire, I estimated over the next 5 years, right around 300,000. It gets a little bit more depending on the year, a little bit less, but around 300,000. For Parks and Rec, it's about 40,000. For electric, I estimated at 200,000. For propane, I believe I put 0. Yep, I
Yeah.
did. For water, I estimated around 100,000. For wastewater, 400, no, I take that back. For wastewater, 300,000. Dropping down to $250,000 after the wastewater plant's complete. Employee housing takes about 20,000. And that's it. None of the others get property
Propane was
taxes.
zero, is that what you said?
Propane was zero. That's what I put in the operation budget we just
I
approved.
got most of that, but I'm sorry, electric?
200. It's on right around the pages,
Yeah.
in the
I
mid
expected
forties,
anywhere to
early
get it.
forties, yeah.
Point is that we couldn't do the funding just through that, but we could minimize the two.
There's things that I call fine tuning that we can discuss today, but we're not going to decide anything about it. So,
Seems obvious we're gonna do 218, right? Why don't we vote on that? What else?
okay,
I think we also have to put together a plan to campaign.
Yeah.
And build support for 218, or I think it'll. You know,
We
what
don't
we
know
got
where-
out of the
we don't know
tap,
where
what
the
we got out of
218 is
Measure
going.
E, that's not support for
what
that.
we don't know about the 218 is what's the target revenue that we need.
Yeah.
So we need a plan of what the long-term plan is for the fire department, how much money that needs over what time period. If we looked at staffing around, we're not going to find all the staff on the first day. There is a ramp up to these things. We need a business plan for how the fire department's going to operate. We take that dollar amount and we allocate it across what the 218 says the benefits are. And we need a campaign because if this goes down, we're done. I mean,
We really,
we either get this one or we're really done.
the business plan really should focus on our own entity. Is that what we have 100% control over? You know, like we can't control what Amador County.
No, they could decide.
They can say they don't want to do it, or they'd say, well, we really, we'll do it for 2.5.
Yeah.
Right? So I think if we we're gonna do a business plan, if we did it over an organization that we control, we can do a more accurate plan. That's probably a more honest conversation with the customers too, because we know we could fulfill that. Now, if we got the 218 passed, and then we said, well, for that same amount of money, we can outsource to Amador, we could do that. But I think we ought to be prepared to do something we know we can implement.
Yeah, I think we need both. And so we know we only need one.
Well, it's hard to get Amador to commit to a service. You know, that would start a year and a half from now. Right?
They don't have to do anything.
Exactly.
So the question I found in my conversations with them, and Rick's had a lot more, is where are the incentives for them where they get some benefit beyond, having a larger territory? And so if that's not obvious, I think their motivation, if they're not highly motivated, it's hard to see how they're going to really rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I guess,
Yeah.
That's not my point. My point was, if you're gonna put together a business plan, let's do it on something we know we could fulfill.
We need that as a
I
minimum.
don't really want to go out with a number that says we're gonna get Amador County to do this and then go to Amador County and they say they want $1 million more.
You just have to sequence things. May I try to motion this so we can bring it,
Sure.
I would motion that we, out of this meeting, take 3 or 4 coincide, that at the same time that we pursue the 218 process by hiring the consultants. I believe we have a app on that. I'm not sure that we,
They have an estimated hourly.
No, we have a proposal.
40,000.
Tina not to exceed.
Okay.
that we proceed with the 218 work on a consultant, that we revisit discussions with Amador, East Alpine, and other relevant prospective outsourced contractors. Because I assume it's been about a year since we talked to them last, but maybe I'm wrong. I assume we need to go back to them and say, and get a proposal, engage their willingness. From that we propose that we create financial scenarios or so-called business plans, and that we begin in communications committee to discuss how we broach this and communicate this to, when we communicate what to the community. That's a 4-point thing. Again, it's proceed with the 218 consultant, restart or revisit discussions with the 3 or 4 logical outsource partners. Construct financial scenarios and business plan from each of those or any of those that respond, including the independent option, and all the while know in the communication committee that we have to have a campaign to communicate it.
I think
Most unwieldy motion you've ever heard.
Well, we have to amend that to.
No, was not the worst, definitely not.
But we have to
We
make
did
sure
it.
that you capture the.
Damn.
I got the points. I mean, we'll massage the minutes.
I trust it.
Well, the other thing is
This the
to,
last part, right?
understand what the procedure is for a LAFCO, for an independent.
So I would amend your motion.
Does that go at the
for-
same time? Yeah.
I don't know if I have to make my own motion, but how does that work?
You can move to amend his motion.
Move to amend Chris's motion to include the LAFCO investigation as well.
How much time you think a campaign should?
There's
Yeah.
no, I don't know what you mean by LAFCO investigation. I don't know what that means.
Is it?
We know what the process is for going through LAFCO. So we don't have to investigate that. We know the process.
Okay.
And it's a vote of LAFCO over which we have some control as we have 2 seats on that board. But they could
There's no
vote.
more that we have to do at that point.
You
So is
can't vote till you have a proposal, right?
there anything that we need to talk to?
We would want
County?
to ask them to convene and present that we would like to go down the path of looking, forming this contingent, but I don't need a poop or get off the pot. We can't
Yeah.
go 5 paths. It doesn't ostensibly work. We need to pick, either we're going to do it in-house as our base number, and then go down that, and you get the 218 passed. And then if we decide after we do it, hey, we can't hire firefighters, maybe let's look at doing it. I would do an independent subsequent to the 218. Because if it does, or I don't know, it's just, because I don't know how that board's gonna vote on things, so I can't speculate on what their financial needs would be.
When you say the Amador County,
I can't speculate on what the new independent districts,
right?
how they would, what their financial needs would be to create a fire department. I don't know that answer, because I don't know
How do we
what
go
their
forward?
retirement's gonna be. I don't know.
How do we go forward with the 218 if we don't know?
We would, what John said, we would do it, assuming we hired our own, and we're in CalPERS Pepper. That's how we can,
But that's a worst case.
That
right?
is the worst
That's the
case.
most expensive option, so it's not a
Very
great deal to
reasonable
take
point.
forward to a ballot. When we know that there's a likelihood of a more expensive option. I'm just,
you're
I'm just
right,
saying-
you're right.
the challenges that we are already facing are uphill, and now you're saying we have to go forward with the worst case, which is exactly what we went through with Measure E. And
Or we get firm cost proposals from one of the 3, and there's only 3 entities that we could add.
Sure.
And then we use that, pick one.
And that honestly should be the next step, is to give the board those numbers, so then you can direct to make a decision whether you want to go LAFCO, try to hire a contract, and then get the 218 so they have a number to work for. I mean, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. We need to know how much it's going to cost.
that's the number one concern.
And if all 3 say no, then we're gonna have to come up with our own internal number of what we think it is for the 218.
Because our own internal number, I guarantee will be higher, will probably be higher. Maybe not higher than CAL FIRE, but probably higher than Amador, because they don't have to deal with the CalPERS issue that we do. So our wages will be more.
And how do we make the 218 not get ahead of advocacy campaign?
I
don't think there's anything to campaign until we know what we're talking about. I mean.
Well, I mean, once you hire the consultant, you spend $40,000 and
Sure, that's
you've got a time window to work within, and does that allow for enough outreach?
That's budget, that's public information in the minutes, that we're doing that. And is,
I don't think so. Yeah, I think it's more like, I think what John's saying is, we start this process, we can't, like, clock starts kind of thing, is the way I think about it. We're not gonna have the 218 consultant on contract are available for.
What is there to say to the public?
That we're
Hey,
going
we
down this
started-
process, yeah, and then you like,
I mean, that's almost a little more than an update to say, after all of the discussions of TAC around December, January timeframe, we are now taking real steps towards a solution, and we're investigating 2 or 3 scenarios. That part of that's called the 218, because guess what? We're gonna raise your taxes. But you said you wanted that 3x or 5x or whatever it was. So I don't think that's not a very difficult communication bullet in the newsletter or on the bill or wherever it would come.
If we don't do more than just run the 218 process, it won't pass.
But once we run the 218 process, then we'll actually know whether some of the things we're talking about, like 1.5 million, less the 300K prop tax thing, or Amador will do it, but East Alpine won't. Right now, there's nothing to say other than,
No, the 218 ends in a decision and
Number.
income
with a number.
with a
and an
number.
obligation, or could we just say thank you very much and do nothing?
Yes.
Exactly, so
Even if it voted to pass, you could still. the
We
board
could still
can't-
not implement.
it's not like the clock is ticking on an inevitable tax increase, it's simply
The
that,
clock is ticking on an inevitable
Just-
closure of the fire department.
yes,
Right.
exactly. So
So,
maybe the communication says, things are, after all the tack, things are quite dire. And good news is we're taking action. Here it is.
I mean, in the most simplest terms, people want fire service, they don't want to pay for it. That's what we learned from the TAC. No, I'm not being
Yeah, you
facetious
said
in the
that, yeah.
least.
No, you're
That's
right.
exactly what we learned. They want it, but they don't want to pay for it. And I'm not speaking for Rick, but I think what we would suggest is that the board direct us to get cost firm proposals, if anyone's willing, from the 3 that could possibly do it.
Outsource, the outsource.
Do you know if your fire chief is classic? He's fire safety classic though, but new hires would be Pepra?
Yes.
So you'd be in the same situation as us,
Safety.
yeah. So, but we would still approach Eastern Alpine and see if there's any interest, and we would approach.
Chief now too.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I
well,
knew
that-
that.
I mean,
Worship?
we talked back in 2018.
We have a Terry, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's Worsham is your chief now?
Yeah. Oh,
So we would approach, so. That will probably take at least 2 months, because it's gonna have to go to their respective boards for each of the, well, maybe not CAL FIRE, but at least for the 2 counties, it would have to go to their boards to gauge interest. Come up with a proposal. It's not gonna be fast, but it's not gonna be terribly slow either. But that still puts us 2 months further out.
Well, I think we gotta have a number to do the 218, we have to know a number.
Totally
And
agree.
it could either be outsourced, could be our own independent paid fire department, and we need to know what those numbers are. And then we have to reach more than the
Yeah.
8 people that are paying attention today.
Correct.
And I guess what I would say, right, this is, I don't. Please understand, this is not my misunderstanding of lack of urgency or anything like that. My biggest concern is I do not want to fall in the traps that we've fallen into. And so as a question, would it make sense to, instead of what kind of Chris motion, I guess, would it make sense to ask you to go and get these proposals? Go, currently, like tomorrow, we'll have we have a communications meeting coming up next week. We have other things, take it to communications and say, we need to go schedule another community event. It could be on Zoom, whatever, not as nothing in person. And say, look, here's what we found in the last 6 months. We found that the 3 agencies that we contract with give us these options. We can do our own Cal Pepra. This is this. We could go this route. It will probably less than that. And here are the options that we see, or we dissolve. And they're all going to cost in this ballpark. To go down that path, we need to go down the 218 path and say, this is that then. And kind of get the community to say, these are the options. Here's what we have concrete. Here are real numbers. Here's what the 218 is. So instead of authorizing the 40,000 today, we wait a month or 2, have all this, have an event, have people take another survey. We have another survey coming out in the biannual survey soon. We could time it at the same time. We could do something like that. So then that way there is more concrete in place to go to the community forward, and we're not starting something and spending money without having a more robust engagement.
I think that's fine. I mean,
not my first choice.
No.
I know
I
it's
would
not, I know it's
would-
not.
I
know it's
wouldn't
not.
support that proposal, just so you know,
Understood.
Because Bob,
because we're out of time.
and therefore instead,
And therefore, instead, we work in parallel.
Yeah.
There's the upfront part of the 218 process that's independent of the total amount that we need. And then I would still propose, just finding out, would Amador even want to bid on this? Because it's going to take quite a while to actually receive one. And then I would try to look out, what would it look like to staff up on our own? What's the rate at which we could do it? What's a staffing level that provides better service than we have today, but is less than ideal? Because in some sense, proving that we can do something and then expanding it is more likely to work than saying, here's the final expansion and we're starting from here. We are out of time. We're asking unfair things. We have 20% non-coverage. And so going slow doesn't work with me.
Well, we need to define the parallel activity then, because
Yes.
just hiring a consultant and having them go off and do a 218.
Right. No.
If we don't know what the numbers are, we don't know how we're gonna implement it, and we don't do outreach, it's not gonna pass.
No, I understand that.
Well,
I don't understand that. Does the consultant need to know what the numbers,
Yes.
yeah,
They need to know.
more than the detail we've discussed today, like 1.5 minus prop tax and
They
so
have
forth,
to, no, they have to have a real,
before they start with their work?
no, not before they start, but they have to have it before they finish.
Because we don't know anything till we've gathered.
I mean, I would caution the board away from backing into numbers with some lesser amount of firefighters that may work if we have volunteers. I mean, I'd be much more comfortable saying this is what we need to run a fire department and provide a path for our captains to get all their certs
Mhm.
and become paid firefighters than, well, we could do just Rick as the chief and pick this cherry here and pick this apple here. We can't do that again. That's what got us into trouble. And that's what was one of my big beefs with the TAC. We came up with these fancy 300,000, 600,000. They were all BS. They weren't real. They could never have worked. But we did it. And then so there's a false sense in the community like, oh, we can just do just the paid fire chief. No, we can't. No, we can't. We could just do a fire chief and just one captain. No.
so
we can't.
I agree with the urgency, Bob. I just want, that's why I was asking, how long does the 218 take, and how long what period of time do we need to build support? Right? And
If you thought about this as a campaign, people aren't really present until this next ski season. The time to actually reach people in person is not until later.
Yeah.
So, if we tried to design this from a calendar point of view, that's how I would think about it.
that's why I'm bringing it up, is I think it'd be very difficult to change the results of the tax survey that people don't want to increase their costs very much.
Well, then the message that the campaign that's what's necessary is to say there may be no middle ground, or, the have your cake, eat it too, the muddle, with just a pro fire chief and nothing else. Maybe the message is, that doesn't work.
Right. Sure, but like,
You still gotta get
we
it.
still gotta have to, like, you
So
still have to engage people and say, we talked about this, we did this, and whether you like it or not, that's what has happened. And we have to have
And
that
suspension
conversation.
is on the table.
Right, but I'm saying like,
That will be shocking, new. That's a campaign to let them know that.
look, I don't disagree with you, Bob, that there's urgency. We cannot get this wrong. And I don't have in the board packet a nicely mapped out timeline that I can say, I'm willing to vote on this because I have confidence that this timeline works. That's where I'm sitting right now,
Mhm.
and that's my concern. And so if we move in parallel, I'm worried. And, this is not officially on our communications agenda for next Thursday. We would, but like, there's lots of things I would want to change but like. That's my concern, is I don't have the perfect clarity and confidence right now to vote that says we're gonna nail this. We have everything lined out, we know the calendar, we know how this is gonna map out. That's my concern.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we don't start.
Well, the need is now. And I don't want to go through another month if Kirk and Fire not responding. And I haven't talked to the captains. I mean, I'm trying to figure out ways to encourage the volunteers that we do have that are dedicated to be here when I need them. And I don't know if increasing the stipend even more would do that. And I'm just gonna throw you out there, captains that are here. I know Spencer's not here. Do you think increasing the stipend more, would that get more people here on the weekends, or just because of work schedules and life and he's available, it just wouldn't make any difference at all?
It's tough to say either way. I mean, everyone has a different schedule. We're all volunteers and it's hard. We work during the week and we have obligations on weekends. And it's hard to keep everyone with different obligations to have a set schedule to cover weekends. I mean, it's hard. There's prior obligations that every person in this room has. And everyone on the fire department has that too. We all have full-time jobs. Our weekends are our time. And being here every weekend means we don't have the summer.
So, Joel?
Yeah, I'm right there with them. I'm gonna go with, no, it's not gonna help. Absolutely not. I mean, we increased it already. I believe we increased it from like $35 for an evening to 100. And it hasn't helped. And I'm gonna be honest, like, my family is more important than money. So, you know, in the wintertime, I'm gonna go back to our 22-23 going into the Measure E, where we talked about this, you know. We gave everything we had. Scott and I work for Vail. We were working 80 to 90 hours a week. When the wintertime comes, when the summer's here, I don't want to be here. And that's most people, you know. So no, and I'm with Doug. I don't want to get it wrong, and I'm with you, Bob. I want to get it right, but there has to be a middle ground there. So we need to not rush what we're doing, because if we rush what we're doing, the people are gonna, you're just throwing it on top of us again. And I want you guys to be in the middle. Like, I want to find a happy medium there that works for us, because the stipends going up is definitely not going to work. You might get a money hungry volunteer that's not qualified or certified, which is going to make that problem worse. Because you're going to have a new person that's only been doing it, you know, 3-4 months, that has no clue what to do during CPR or where to go for potholes or anything else. Throw it, whatever you want in there. And I think going with stipends, increasing them is not gonna work at all. And I can tell you from myself and from my heart, it's not gonna entice me to come up on the weekends. So there's my take on it.
Thank you. And, you know, we're gonna keep doing what we're doing, but my comfort level with missing shifts is, it's eroding. And if I lose any of my captains or officers, I'm gonna have to stop. And we're also gonna change our operations. We're not gonna send anybody out on our department by themselves unless it's an officer that I know can be capable and actually do something positive. But sending a person who's relatively new to go out and handle a fire call, that's just too much liability. And,
Yeah, and I think,
and I want to say thank you to Eastern Alpine County. Terry, I know you're here. We really appreciate the help. So.
yeah, I think, another way to say what Doug was saying is the 218 is one part of this process. And we don't have the process defined, right? And it'd be uncomfortable to have the time ticking on 218 and not have access to most of the residents here to campaign. And I'm fairly certain it won't pass.
Let me just say one thing, maybe there's a misunderstanding. just because I drive them through so efficiently. We could have the 218 assessment completed and sit on it for 6 months. And do nothing with it. There's nothing to say we have to act on it once the engineer's done with their study. Not one thing. We could just do the 218 assessment and do nothing else with it for as long as the board desires. I mean, the hearing process, right? You can do the hearing process in, I think it's a 60-day process.
Well,
But you don't have to start that process just because the report's done.
well, it does have a shelf life. And the process has a shelf life. Is they probably do a mock ballot? Is that part of their proposal?
It is not part of the proposal.
That's probably not good either. So I guess I'm more focused on how do we get it passed? And we got one component that we're trying to vote on here of something that requires cost estimates and how it's going to be organized and how it's going to be evangelized to the voters that are going to have to, for the the real estate owners that are going to have to pay for it. And I feel I'd be much more supportive if we could get the complete plan in place and then execute and have a higher degree of confidence that we're going to get it passed.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like urgency got us into measuring and we did it and we saw the outcome. I think, like John said, I feel like what I would feel the most comfortable voting on is a clear plan with a roadmap like we have at the end of the board packet of the timelines with everything that's going to have to fit in, when things are going to happen, and have us thought through all of these details.
What's the first thing on that roadmap? What's the first one or two things?
Getting their cost estimates, having real numbers. I mean, that's what I think what they talk
From
about.
Amador and Alpine.
So for the servicing agencies, and then, cost of our independent, and go to the, we can have, in that roadmap, we'll say we do, that's what we do maybe today, we vote on maybe that. I know, Bob, I understand you would say no, but like, and not vote on the 218, or we could vote on it, but not endorse the 218 in terms of my motion potentially. And then that way we can schedule, like, communications committee goes out and puts together this roadmap with staff or something like that. And then we come to the next board meeting, or we have emergency board meeting in 2 weeks to go over some of these details, and we approve that process. And at that point we do, I don't know. But I don't like that we would be going into this saying, here are the things we're doing in parallel, and not have the end and worked backwards. I think that's what hurt us before.
Well, it's the results of Measure A. I mean, the voting was, it was abysmal, right? And the results were abysmal. And then secondly, the TAC comes up with similar results, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
Don't raise my utilities,
Utilities.
don't raise this more than 5x.
Yeah.
So that sentiment has to change.
Right. Like,
So another way to say that, the community needs to understand that that sentiment leads to an end of the fire department. And if you say, don't raise my rates and I don't want to pay taxes, please keep doing it like you're doing it. Everything works except that third point. We can't keep doing it. So that doesn't necessarily contradict what Doug is saying. In terms of, I mean, you still could, I suppose, say, let's get business cases, cost estimates, proposals, etc., before we start the 218. That's fine. Maybe there's even a middle step to say, could we increase the 300,000 today from prop tax to some bigger number? Or could we take more from utilities so that instead of, a 1.2 number, it's 800,000? Because we're taking from utilities, but that goes to John's point that they don't want us to raise their utility rates. The most important message seems to be this is wishful thinking. I mean, that so many of you are saying to our tax survey, for example, or it's wishful thinking because it can't continue.
yeah, I mean, if we had a community forum 3 months from now, 2 months from now, or 1 month now that says, here are the like as of like literally we have a contract that's valid for a year, as I think Rick said, something like that.
Right.
We have this. It's not hypothetical. We've done a business plan of this, and this.
Yeah.
Look, we could go down this 218 process and it's going to cost $1.5 million. And, we ask for feedback on all these things, and if 90% of the people stand up and say, shut it down then. I mean, that's.
And Eric, did you say you can get, you think you made a joke, you can get these 218s processed pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
I mean, the noticing periods, I think it's 60 days on a 218. It's, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
the initial, the second hearing, and then the vote, counting.
then Bob, what does speak against Doug's sequence of, like, what is the need to start on the 218? If you take 2-3 months to do that,
But I think he wants to start on the 218 assessment engineering study. That it's different than the 218 voting process. And I'm not going to put words in Bob's mouth, but I think based on our discussions, if we keep, this isn't the right word, so it's not intestinal fortitude. If we keep procrastinating, and not for reasons that aren't legitimate, I'm afraid that in the next 3 months, the fire department's going to have to fold. That is my fear. And then we're going to be coming from a point of, we don't have one now, point of weakness. That's my fear. And we're talking about $40,000. If we had mock balance, maybe it's a little bit more. Sure, if we could do an amendment with him for that. But like I said, there's nothing that stops us from starting the assessment engineering and not bringing it to the board until all the communications and the kumbaya has been sung and the hands have been held.
sorry, this is a repeat, but what does the 218 engineering report,
So the
what
first,
does that answer most
Sure.
importantly?
sure. So,
How much each vote is worth?
Oh, that.
well, how much benefit is received is a nice
Oh,
way.
okay,
of
so
saying
we're
it.
right, okay, right, it's that whole thing.
So
The
this
benefit of-
engineering
okay,
study
that.
done by a California registered professional engineer certifies that this benefit assessment for each parcel is fair and reasonable based on some criteria that they establish.
The whole is, yeah, I get, as soon as Bob said, what each vote is.
That's
worth.
the engineer's assessment.
Okay,
And hopefully done in a way that won't be challenged. And
Yeah, of course. And that's why we hire experts, because they know how to do these things
like last time it was parking spots or something.
as a proxy for benefit received.
All right, so. I threw a motion bottle 20 minutes ago. Let's start over. Doug has a motion, I know it.
Yeah, I mean, look,
And let me say one other thing.
Sure.
If you want to get an election passed, you hire a campaign manager. Because it's a full-time job to get it done.
That's kind of, I mean, I'm not advocating that precisely, but that's kind of what I think we ought to be discussing first is how do we get a $1.5 million tax to pass? And going through all the motions, to hire a consultant to define how it's allocated. Without that, it's not gonna pass.
Yeah.
So,
yes. That's my concern, is that, yes, we can do this, we can spend $40,000 on it, but I think there is an optics of even doing that to the community. Like, if we were to vote on this and say today, I worry that optics is, this is the same thing they did during Measure E. They started a process, they didn't pull us all in. Obviously, these are open meetings, people can attend, but it's just a regular scheduled board meeting and people are here enjoying 4th of July weekend, not sitting here with us talking about this. And I'm worried that even enacting that to start, the chatter that would go through the community is, oh, they're at it again. They're just gonna start doing their things and they didn't engage us. That's my concern. You're starting off on the negative foot already, and we don't even have that campaign plan in place. That is,
But we better engage them with the hard reality.
that's not a problem.
if we've got the metal to say that we disband, then it should be the message, because I think people just assume, like, most people aren't paying attention.
They
at all.
assume they
They
can
just
keep on
assume,
coasting.
like, when I bought my
I
house
do.
here 17 years ago, I didn't ask, hey, did they have a fire department here? You know,
Exactly.
how is it well funded? You know, it's like, you kind of assume that it's there. And,
I didn't know.
I think, you also assume snow removal's there and waste removal and all sorts of
That's
things,
true.
right? It's not what most of the community.
Grocery stores, we could go on.
Grocery store, great restaurants.
All right.
Uh,
Eric, do you have a recommendation? Eric, do you have a recommendation?
I defer to the chief. Put him on the hot seat.
Okay, you have a hand.
Looks like we have a hand up from Eric. Is that Eric?
Yeah, it is, Eric.
If you want, if you're welcome to public comments.
Mhm.
Question. Sorry.
I've been listening to this conversation. I know it's a tough thing, but I think you're circling around the answer that may be what you could go ahead and do, because on the one hand, you want to communicate with the community, but on the other hand, the community will want specifics. I mean, that's part of the communication has to be something. Well, what does it mean to me? And I think that here's what I would suggest. I suggest that you initiate the portion of the 218 process that simply evaluates benefit received without attaching necessarily dollars to it. And the second is to contact the partner agencies to see whether or not there's interest, and even see if they would forward some potential costs. And the third is to develop a potential budget for independent agency. And those are the three things that would help answer, what does it mean to me? I mean, do I get as much benefit as the resort? Do I get as much benefit as a residence? What does it mean to me? So those three things would funnel into a business plan, as you guys have suggested. And you start communicating today, right away, about what is going on and what's happening. You're taking these steps to develop options to discuss with the community. I mean, I think you've got to start doing something that gives the community the information it will want if you want to start communicating.
Eric, on your first step, you advocated having the 218 process determine benefit, but without a dollar figure, or why leave off the dollar figure?
Well, because you don't know the dollar amounts yet.
That's what
I mean, until you develop a budget for an independent agency and talk about it and see if that's realistic, before you find out from your potential partner agencies what they might want to charge. You don't know what the dollar amount is, but the engineer can say, well, whatever the dollar amount is, this percentage would go to each homeowner, or this percentage would go to each commercial entity, or whatever those entities, however, and based on whatever methodology they come up with, other than number of parking spaces. But you've got to have some specifics if you're going to communicate well. And you can start communicating now, saying, here's what we are doing, and we expect that by X date, we can have a community meeting to discuss what we've found out so far and get some guidance about where to go from there.
Okay.
That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks.
I mean, I think I appreciate what Eric's saying. I mean, my concern is that it's like kind of with the snow removal. It's like we could get percentages. You don't know the total budget. You don't know what you're asking for. It's maybe that helps, maybe that doesn't. You know, but like, I don't know. I think indicating that we're going forward with it concerns me. And that it just says that we're just we can.
All right, let me try again. Okay. I'm gonna make up time frame just so we have it, okay? Let's say in the next 4 months, we learn two things. What it might cost, okay, under whatever assumptions we find are available, and how that would be distributed to each and every property. Because without that, you can't really have a discussion. And so the first part of 218 is the assessment. So, right, because not everybody's going to be treated the same, and a big player in this is going to be the commercial side. So you can't know whether it's going to pass until you know how much you're asking from each person. And I think that's what the TAC asked us to do, which was, all right, here we have kind of a range of what people would like to pay. Well, all right, that's the shutdown plan. Okay, we're closer to that. We have another, another X months experience of what's happening. The summer's not going to be good in terms of coverage. We know that, and there's little we can change that, although we'll try. But if we said, in 4 months, we would know how it gets allocated, and we'd know several ideas, they all fall into a similar range. Here's what it costs. We either properly fund this or we accept the reality.
I think that one of the challenges I see with that is that the funding mechanism of the 218 itself, that, I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding, like that will involve a lot of community, like that will be a lot of conversation, right? Like it's not, it's a parking spaces, like all that stuff that's its own process that will have to happen and have community input, right? Engineering alone,
No, we have one way to increase funding to the proper level, and that's to change the fire assessment.
based off the current combustible square footage.
No, we have one way of raising enough money to properly fund the fire department, and that's changing the fire assessment fee. Okay, we can't tell anybody today how that fee would be structured or what percentage of the total your property would bear. So we could start on that now, okay? But in terms of delivering what we learned, we wouldn't do that until we had a couple of proposals of knowing, and this is the total amount of money that we need.
But I guess, I understood, but. And maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but the entirety of the engineering process would be looking at all of this. And, you know, going back to Measure E, that benefit received proxy was parking spaces. There would be a whole conversation that would involve the public at some point through this engineering process. Am I incorrect or am I correct?
Incorrect.
Incorrect.
You don't need to know.
The community are not experts and are not signing that engineered assessment report.
The engineering assessment report
These are
says
experts that do.
you
this
either
and
do
know
it this
how to
way or
structure it
you're
legally.
violating the law.
So there is no community input on this. And they can come out with parking spaces as the right proxy again.
I only
No.
watched the Amador County 218 process, and there were very lively discussions and public hearings about the unfairness of the allocations. And it was like what I said an hour ago now. You know, you got a Walmart's a commercial property, so they're getting a rate that's the same as an acre of land with a hot dog stand on it. And they talked about that and argued about that for hours. When you drive up here now, you see orchards that have been bulldozed. It's because vacant land is cheaper than orchards. So people said, well, these, trees aren't worth it, so we'll bulldoze all these trees. There's concern about driving out the growing wine industry because their rates were going to go up, right? So the fact that we come out with the allocation doesn't mean people are going to like it or agree with it. And there is going to have to be an appeal process that says, here's how you could present your allocation and why it should be changed, right? And so there is at least that was part of the Amador County 218.
That as a step in the process is its own part of it, right? In terms of that people will be able to appeal the 218. I mean, when we release it or when we find this, people would be able to say that this isn't fair. And then we'd have to go back to the drawing board or.
Well, I think with the Amador, they also had the consultant run a mock election. So they basically sent out what your assessment would be. So you know exactly what you're
What
going
would
to pay,
that
and they got the feedback of who's it going to pass or not before they ran the real election. Presumably, if it wasn't going to pass, they would have probably tried to make some changes, right?
So, okay. But if there's only, I guess what I'm grappling with is, it sounds like by law, we are going to have a consultant say, this is how you have to do it, and this is it. But you're saying that there are changes to it. What changes would you make if what they propose?
Well, however, there's an ongoing appeal process, so you can go in and pitch your case. Yeah, the same way you could with your property tax, right? Like you could document comparables to your house and send it to Alpine County and say, hey, I'm assessed too high.
I mean, look,
We 3 months ago, we asked for two things.
Yeah.
One is, can we structure a retirement program through what structure do we need? And would you solicit bids for a 218 process? Because 3 months ago, we already knew that was the only way we have to get sufficient funds to properly staff. So we now have those two pieces of information. I'm ready to take the next step.
it is the 218 engineering, so it's $40,000. Is that for the entire process of the balloting included, or so the engineering, we logically are splitting this into two parts. There is the engineering allocation. So again, I'm equating this to snow removal, coming up with the percentages, i.e. I could say every property in Kirkwood has its 1%, 2%, whatever it is, whatever. That is separate than then going out and setting out a ballot.
Correct.
So that's under $40,000, let's say. I don't know what how that balances out, but
Yeah, I'd have to look back. at the
some
proposal.
portion of the 40,000 is just the engineering portion. And then we would go forward in 2
At that
months.
point, we need to know whether our cost plans are complete or not,
Correct.
and whether we have a communication plan. We sync that up. Or we use it as a motivator to try to get it done in parallel. Then we're in a position to tell the community. These are the
I'm
prices.
sorry, this should be laid out as part of this. Of what we're voting on today. It shouldn't be, hey, we know we're gonna do all this other hard stuff, like campaigning for an election, and we know we're gonna. Have to involve the community, and we know we're gonna have to talk to service providers, and we know we're gonna have to do this. But we want to start with this, well, it'd need to be a lot easier to vote in favor of if it was mapped out as a. Project instead of just saying, I want to do one component of a project. In the back of my mind, I know I have to do these other things. Especially after the results of Measure E and after the feedback from the TAC, which doesn't support any $1.5 million number. So. I don't want to sound like I'm not in support or feeling urgency, and I do feel like we're putting an extremely unfair burden on Chief Ansel, and we have for a long time. But I want to do it so it passes, or at least raise the probability. So if we could have the rest of that mapped out as part of a plan. Instead of us, doing catch-up work on how we're gonna get from, what are we at, 28% of the vote or something like that on Measure E? We're gonna have to double that.
I'm with John.
Is Proposition 218 a simple majority or is it a 2/3 majority?
It's a majority of,
Majority
it's
of
a
the
simple majority of those that
received.
vote.
Yeah. The votes,
Weighted by the benefit
Weighted
received.
by their fee.
the votes are, so,
Which is TBD.
So, Vale and Cobb have heaviest weights in the ballot.
it depends on how they assign.
Yeah, how they decide, wait, there's 7 or 8, was it 7 or 8% of the assessment round, right? You need 50%, so they're 8%.
Nice little ski resort you have there. It'd be a shame if there were.
Dear Lord.
So yeah, I mean.
Boys made it out before
20%
Sally's completed
of
that's the
the
minutes.
vote. 16% of the vote.
I mean, that,
Based on
We don't
the
know.
application.
we don't know
No,
that.
no, no.
Because
Based
like,
based off of what we know, what we use today, that would be that,
well,
but that's not.
you can't, no, that's totally wrong, because there's gonna be some benefit assessed on the meadow, which Vale owns. Heavenly Valley LLP owns. There'll be some assessment on that, but that's gonna be way different than Animal House. Right? Because it's a meadow where there's recreation, so it's a lower risk than an unsprinklered, 50-year-old building.
Right.
Right? So how that all works out, what I can tell you is in terms of sheer acreage they own, 28% of the valley they own. Isn't that the number we came up with? I think something like that. Just in terms of sheer acreage. But is going to be a different assessment on the, like I said, on the meadow versus Animal House or Renwick
What about the
or
lease? What about
the
the
list.
lease? What about the leased land? Yeah.
we cannot assess federal land. Yeah, you cannot assess federal land, so the leased land will not be assessed. That's not permitted. Because you assess the property owner, not the lessee or let's say a tenant. I can't assess a tenant in KMA. All I can assess is the property owner and fee title, and you cannot assess the federal government or the state government for that matter. Although special districts can be assessed, which is fun. State likes their bite of the apple. To answer your question, Doug, 10,000 was the benefit analysis out of the 34,000.
Benefit analysis.
Yeah,
The cost.
it's all right. You asked how much of the 40 was that, so a quarter was the benefit of the engineer's study.
That's page.
Well, 315.
Thank you.
So you think there's some risk we're taking in getting that started?
Yes, I do. And this is this risk I stated before, which is I think the perception of how this all worked for Measure E is different. And I think I can be convinced that spending $10,000 or $12,000 to say, come forward with in 2 months saying, all right, here's the community meeting. You know, we've got.
No, there's no community
No,
meeting when that's done.
I understand, that's not related to 218 though. I'm saying there's a community meeting when we have finished this and the engineer said, this is how it's allocated. Fact.
There's no meeting at that point.
I'm not saying because of the 218 process. I'm saying because we want to have one. And we say, this is the allocation mechanisms. We have 3 proposals for, you know, up to 3 proposals of what we're doing. We've got our own 2 case studies, you know, CalPERS versus the, you know, independent LAFCO. So we have 5 options on how to, like, of dollar amounts to fund. If you take this roster of what you're paid or what you would pay times any of those 5 numbers,
Mhm.
this is what your options are.
Right.
If we voluntarily, independent of the 218 process, went forward with that and presented that, I think that could be a valuable conversation to have with the community at that time.
Okay.
I am still. But again, I would have liked this all to be mapped out nice and neatly so that we can have this all laid out, because after that's scheduled for Labor Day weekend. I don't know if we're gonna be ready by then.
I don't think so.
But this is what I'm saying is that I'd like to have more of a plan here, and I feel like we're winging it a little bit. I can be convinced that what I just described is a good idea. It makes me uncomfortable voting for it because it does not feel like a good idea to not have this clearly mapped out in our own minds as a board as to all the things that we are going to do and need to do between now and all of these things to happen. That is my concern. And if we enact and spend $10,000, you know, I don't know, but like. That's where I am. I don't know.
It does say public meetings as phase 2 up there.
That's for the public, that's not part of the benefit assessment. That's the subsequent step.
So
But
I'll
yes,
take-
they will be doing the tours.
I'll take the opposite view. Saying staff, come back when you have more things worked out. And that costs us more time lost. I think that's bad. I don't think there's any risk of something we know has to get done and somebody's available to do it, of getting that started. It makes me feel like we're actually paying attention and trying to do something.
We've had time to, I don't know, I don't want to be later. You could have come to this meeting, I think, with more information in the last couple of months then, potentially.
We didn't have the information until about a week ago.
Which information? The
The
proposal?
information of what structures could be done and what would happen. So the legal memo was just available. I insisted it come as early as possible because it's been 3 months since we asked to do something. We have that answer back. So directing staff to develop a set of business plans, proceed with the first part of the 218 and start to develop a campaign that we can start to discuss. You know, and we don't go public until we have the pieces pulled together so we can actually tell people what it would be.
The legal memo came from Francisco.
No,
No.
that's the consultant.
Consultant.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that would be my motion.
Well, I think I would go for a very, very long motion that would outline everything we just said, because just saying in the back of our minds, we have a game plan, but we just want to hire a 218 consultant is a bad message. And
Mhm.
we're already fighting an uphill battle,
Right.
and
Okay. Do you want me to
I don't-
repeat what I just said, or is that
I don't know, it was documented, so.
what?
Can you write it down for us, Eric, in terms of what the motion is here or
Right,
something on
that-
the screen? Or I don't know, like.
No, and I'm gonna push back on, you know, you should have come with something sooner. You should have come with more of a plan. You need to make a decision so we can do a plan. Not staff go come up with a plan that you're gonna completely 180. That's not how this works. We present the options. I couldn't have come up with more of a clear plan than what we gave you, which is, here's your options. Now, board, make a decision. Keep on throw the D word in there before that.
Oh, I thought it was decision.
No, it wasn't a decision. It was a decision. That's what needs to happen.
So,
And if that decision is divest, then make the decision. Make the decision. If it's not, then make the decision that we're going to start a PR campaign and we're gonna get quotes. Make that decision. Or make the decision, we're gonna start the 218 benefit assessment and the campaign and we're gonna get quotes. Make that decision. Pick one.
Eric, I don't think, just to be clear, I'm not saying we shouldn't make a decision. I am just concerned that if the decision that we make,
I'm not arguing any of that. I totally understand what you're saying about it. What I'm saying is, you said staff didn't come with a plan. We couldn't.
no, I'm not, I'm thinking that, what I'm,
Well, project plan.
project plan, not a,
Not the final answer.
not the final answer, the project plan, of how we are going to lay this out to make it successful. And we have now answers, and I think I think what John's saying as well, is that like, it is hard to know, keep in our minds, all of the things that have to happen along the way. If we vote for the thing, if we said to take action, we don't know what that, I don't have a clear action of what those actions then result in when, and how that's gonna play out. That's all I'm gonna say.
You're never gonna be able to get the plan because we're relying on other entities, especially the independent one, LAFCO. So you can't, and I can't tell you the when on when I'll get a cost proposal because we're relying on another entity. So there is no pen. There could be a flow chart.
Sure.
But there's no time constraints because we're at the mercy of everyone else. And CalPERS, if we decided to go with our own, we still are waiting on them to get the proposal. They said they would have it and they haven't.
Yeah, I think that LAFCO or CalPERS are seem to be solvable issues. Like, they don't seem like high risk issues to me.
No, just timing.
I would say, the next level would be outsourcing to Amarillo County, where we don't have control over that. They're gonna have to want to do it. Or they're gonna want a certain amount of money to do it, right? So that's got the next level risk. The highest level risk is we just got 28% of the vote on Measure E, and we just had a survey done by the TAC that said what most people would pay more than five X.
The majority was not,
Maybe
25% was.
You know what the highest risk is? Is that this gentleman who's given so much says, I'm done today because this.
my statements aren't.
That's the highest risk.
It's. Well, then we can rush through a process and
I'm not
have
saying
it
rush the
fail.
process, but I'm saying.
I know,
the
I
highest
just need
risk
to be
is your
shouted at
department.
about that. I care about Chief Hansel, and I want him to be here, and I think it's unfair, the situation we put him in. But I wanna put together a 218 process that's actually gonna pass a vote.
So do we.
Well, that's not laid out in this. And I guess it is to your satisfaction, it's not to mine. So you could just put it on a vote and let's just vote on it. We're not getting anywhere.
Let me try
You're
again.
threatening,
with a
that's
proposal.
great, go ahead.
Who's threatening? I'm just
That was
saying
a
that's the
threat.
worst case scenario. I have no control over what Rick does. That is not a threat. How dare you?
Come
That
on,
is
hey,
offensive.
come on, this is,
So,
I agree with John, it's probably time to take a vote.
what I would propose is that we instruct staff, authorize staff to develop an internal business plan of what it would look like if we staff ourselves, gauge interest on an external plan and see who might be willing to do that. Do the benefit assessment of the 218 process and stop at that point, and then develop an overall flow chart of the things that have to happen. And we don't really, that's all background that we need before we can tell the community any details. Otherwise, what we're letting them know is we now know what our options are from financial. And we don't know what our costs are. So we're starting that process, and we don't know how it would be allocated in the 218. So that's the input we need to have a community discussion. So
What's your motion?
that would be my motion.
Internal plan, external quote, benefit assessment, communication plan.
With those amendments, I'd be supportive. But I don't wanna relive the Measure E, so,
Well, no one,
well, that's,
All right, let's vote. I don't know, like, yeah, a lot of discussion.
yeah,
Let's just vote.
I'm kinda done.
I'll second that motion.
okay,
So we'll take a vote.
All right.
all right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye,
Yeah, it's amended, yeah.
The flow chart too, that was the thing I missed.
Okay, we have a little bit more on the meeting. We go. Our department, thank you for attending. Thank you for what you've done and
Yes.
Hang in there, guys.
okay.
Tell them about the idea. See if they like that.
Major projects updates.
5-star bank endorsement.
Oh, 5-star banking endorsement, sorry.
We talked about this briefly, as a policy, and so we came back to the board. 5-stars requested us to give them a blurb about our interactions with them that they can use for commercial advertising. There will be no compensation or remuneration for this. And we recommend that the board authorize staff to do so.
Any question?
What's the duration?
Of the campaign?
Yeah, if they start providing lousy service for us next month. Yeah.
We'll just tell them we want the option to pull the endorsement at any time we're dissatisfied.
That'd be good.
Is there any legal exposure for doing this?
All of these other
It's a
tons of
public
other districts are
utility
doing it.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've had good luck so far.
Yeah, they made us almost 50 grand over BMO.
Okay, is there a motion to approve this?
I'll motion with John's recommendation to make sure that we have the option to withdraw when we decide to, or if we decide to.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. All right, now.
Any reports?
Major projects.
Yeah.
No change except for we had put in the slightly tweaked from the capital plan in here, so it now reflects that accurately. So I really hope we get the electric plan this quarter. I'm about at my wit's end. We're actually, Brandy and I are to the point where we're just going to tell them just to give us the master plan without the maps, because that seems to be their hiccup. Everything else in the plan itself is fine. It's just the maps seems to be the holdup. So we may be bringing that back to operations if we get that without the maps.
Okay. GM report,
I think we're good.
okay. Rick, is Rick coming back?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Then standing committee reports. Are there any additional
Communications.
items?
No, we went through
Eric,
the.
I'm sorry, on manager's report, given the time, I'll just simply ask, next meeting, I understand you're talking with each of the counties. Maybe there was a talk with, maybe it's ongoing, but I learned this from John Reeder, who may have been at the talk, that it started with Amador, and I just applaud that, and I'd love to hear more about it at another time.
That was not us. We just were there for support. That was KCA looking for
Reader
funding
and
options.
PCA,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, in essence, I can tell you there's no funding available and they recommended they go after FEMA or OES.
You check under all sofa cushions. Just kidding. Okay.
No, I did not. But yeah, that's the gist of that discussion. It was an easy one, and I think there's still money. That was with Jeff Brown. I think when Jeff Brown gave him the reality of the situation, I think maybe he just realized that there was no sofa cushions there to look under.
Okay, are there any other
I don't
committee
know.
reports come in? Okay, Doug had a couple items from communications.
I mean, couple of items, sorry.
I got it. I'm pulling it up. There you go.
I can,
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress here. I will just comment that a lot of the FAQs that we are working on right now could benefit from some of the information in the documents that we approved today, even because a lot of that's just general information we
Absolutely.
could pull from that. We have a couple of interesting things coming up. We have a newsletter subscriber campaign. One of the things that you'll see is that we've made some good progress on making it easier to sign up for our newsletter. So based on the conversation here, we're going to have a QR code that people can scan and just quickly sign up for at the festival on Saturday. we've been working on newsletter content, so we're excited to see that we had our first iteration of a new concept of interviews with and getting to know our general manager was the first one to go out, and we're going to allocate that across the committee, and hopefully that will potentially be involved board members or volunteer firefighters or other members of the district and greater community here in
Mhm.
order to get that out there. Other than that, I will note there was an item here about district survey notification. We were talking about this from the concept of the TAC was where it came from, where we wanted to make sure that people understood in our surveys that especially as we come up to the biannual survey that is happening, that we have a notification that survey responses could be published in aggregated form in some ways anonymized. Currently, we do it anonymized in terms of comments. Our general manager raised a concern about how we do get personal attacks in some of our comments.
Mhm.
Not all the time, certainly, but that does happen, and that the negative detriment that can have to the staff, and that the board could consider this as we think about the biannual survey about, do we want to allow open-ended responses for one, but if we do, should they be reported with or without attribution? And that's something that committee or the board might want to
Okay.
consider. So-
My opinion is, because what I currently do is if there are things that are inappropriate, I unilaterally remove them.
But you know, again, even if we could say with attribution still or without attribution, so that's another decision we could make, because currently they're not attributed to people individually. Report them.
Okay, right.
So-
Well, whatever the committee wanted to do in terms of attribution or not. But even if it's attributed, if it's
Sure,
inappropriate, we don't have an obligation to publish it and distribute it.
Understood.
Could you remind us the timing for the survey?
Well, that's the next topic was the biannual survey, where that's coming up when we want to have it go out. And one of the comments here was if there are survey topics that might be related to the conversation we just had on the agenda item of fire emergency medical services, that we don't want to over survey the community on any way. So we want to be thoughtful about when and how that gets communicated in a broader context. So I think this is part of the aligning our strategy that we just voted on with what we would do here as standard practice and making sure that we're not misaligned.
Mhm.
That's the idea here. And I just want to make sure that we as a board or staff are cognizant of that.
So I think you have to answer 4 before we do 5.
Yes, I mean, certainly.
And then, and then the additions. I agree.
I mean, do you want the committee to make a recommendation for that? For whether we attribute or not
Yeah,
attribute?
I think whatever the committee wants to do.
Fantastic. So we'll add
Yeah.
that to our.
To August, or no, this,
You're gonna do
we can still get it out by Monday. I'll still be 72
We'll
hours.
we'll
ahead
figure
of
it out.
time.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then bring that back to the board in August,
August.
along with the survey and any additional questions, then we could publish it in September, which is Labor Day. It's kind of when we usually do it, so.
And then the rest is just in the roadmap, which is on the next page.
Okay. And the IT committee will have its first meeting, IT and
Yeah.
cybersecurity will start meeting on Monday.
We have a draft charter and a couple of agenda items, so meeting Monday.
Okay, are there any general board discussions anyone wants to bring up? Okay, I recommend a cooler climate.
We could accelerate the capital project to get the heat pumps in here.
Well, you want to put.
I'm just saying, we could accelerate it 1 year.
Yeah, okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.